All right, I'm calling the meeting to order. Can I have a second?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, can everybody agree or disagree on that? Yes. All right,
Motion to approve the minutes.
Second the motion.
all in favor?
Aye.
Can we all rise to the national anthem? To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'll take Mr. Swanee. Mr. Casanova. Mr. Matu. Here. Mr. Medina.
Here.
Mr. Cooley. Mr. Farrar.
Here.
And Vice Chair Trudeau.
Present.
So the first order of business this evening is a presentation from MHCP Collab and MKSP Studios project consultants. I'd also ask before we get started that we hold questions to the end, that it's a lengthy presentation. But we do have, for those of you who would like this information, we have a list of talking points and frequently asked questions are answered in this handout that will explain what the village is doing. If you'd like a copy, you can get that. And then also, we would ask that you sign in, please. I think Mr. Agee has
Yeah, we have it in the audience.
a laptop, and you can sign in and note your presence this evening. So with that,
Can I just, listen, a moment, talk about the minutes, the last minutes that we have?
of course,
Approve these?
yes, sir.
Okay,
Motion to
motion.
approve.
all in favor?
Yes.
All right. Melissa, you're up.
What's the protocol when she's making a presentation to ask a question in the end or?
We would ask that we hold questions to the end if possible.
Okay, sounds good.
Fine.
Yeah, I mean, I
And
think
with
if it's
regard
a,
I'm sorry, with regard to the minutes, Vice Chair Trudeau moved to approve, and who seconded? Mr.
I second.
And all in favor, okay.
I mean, I think if you have a burning question, you can interrupt us, that's fine, but we want to try to get through this fast so we can have a discussion after.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. Let me,
It's wireless, you can take it down to, take it with you wherever you.
this?
You have to turn it on. And it's portable.
Oh, okay, can you all hear me? Great. Okay, so the last time we presented, we were asked to provide a little background information about ourselves. So our company is MHCP Collab. With me, I'm Melissa Heggie, my husband Matt Heggie, I'm Sarah Valan, planning intern. And so we were hired by the city. We are a urban planning consulting firm. And on our team is MKSP Amanda, who's just running all of the design work and the visioning work for the project. We started the process in June, and it's kind of a quick turnaround time because we want to get this in front of the community, in front of the council. But my background is I've been working as a planner for 23 years in South Florida. I'm a certified planner specializing in urban planning, outreach, and transportation planning. So I just want to go through very quickly the process of where we've gone. Oh, do you want to introduce the meeting agenda?
I can.
Okay.
Do I do that? Good evening, everybody. Matt Amanda, MKSA principal. Just a little background on me real quick. I'm a registered landscape architect. Been practicing for 21 plus years in Florida and throughout the rest of the United States and international. I've seen a lot of really good projects and really bad projects over that time frame. And so our firm is based in Orlando. That's where I'm based out of, but we also have presences in other offices throughout the eastern seaboard of the United States. So we cover a pretty wide swath of the city and do a lot of things for a lot of communities throughout the United States. For the meeting agenda today, we have 4 basic buckets that we want to discuss with you today. Melissa's going to go over the process of where we've been and where we're going to go, what's left in this process as we develop these concepts and these ideas. We'll then move into the meat of the conversation, and this is based off of conversations, or the conversations we've been having, most importantly the last one, where questions about how do we define the character of the parkway, this corridor, what does that mean as we look at various conditions, architectural styles, open space, transportation, streetscape hierarchy. We're also going to be looking at how do we achieve that 1.0 FAR, and what's that mean as far as from a code standpoint, and what suggestions we're going to propose that could be made to make that more possible. And the last thing we're going to talk about is about scenarios, which you can see on the easels behind me here. This we hope is going to be informative, so you can start to see how some of these planning exercises and these planning, I guess, regulations start to formulate on these different developments or these different parcels. I will say though that these aren't concepts; these are a way for us to study what we need to do to make recommendations that might change some of the zoning requirements, right? We're not proposing any of these. This is a tool for us to examine and to evaluate different scenarios of development.
So Matt's going to be giving the majority of the presentation, but I just wanted to go over the process and where we come. So like I said, we started in June. We had our kickoff, and we call it the discovery phase, which is really the existing conditions. And we've done 3 meetings with the Pinecrest Parkway Citizens Committee. The first one we did June 9th. And in that meeting, we presented our credentials, a little bit about the project, and introductions, and we had kind of a free discussion about things we'd like to see in the process. Our second meeting, we talked about the project itself and the project messaging. We went through the talking points about the project and frequently asked questions. So all of that information is on the city's website and it's been disseminated, and you can get all the information you want about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and the history of the project. The third meeting that we did, which was July 19th, in that meeting, we presented the findings of the discovery report. So we presented information about the work that we've done, the existing conditions analysis. We've looked at some case studies, good examples and bad examples. And then we also did an analysis of what you can build under the current code. So we want everybody to understand the limitations right now with the code as a baseline for additional things that we can do. So as a kind of a jumping off point for where we'd like to go. We started with the drill down. So the drill down is when we actually get into the analysis and the details of what we'd like to do, of some of the recommendations of testing. So here what you see, these build out scenarios are starting to get down into the details of what would you do if you could play around with different things, with the open space, with the building massing, with the articulation, looking at the case studies and understanding the existing conditions that we started with. We are going to be doing a visioning session in the next couple of weeks. We're going to set that date tonight. That will be a point in time where we'll present a little bit more detail of the concepts and some three-dimensional illustrations. And we'll have a discussion, and that's going to be more of an open public forum. We'll have some surveys for people to answer electronically. We can post that on the screen behind us. And it'll be more interactive, so the idea is that we're going to present ideas and we'll have more of a discussion. We will then, if you go to the next slide, we will be presenting our findings to council as an update. We have 2 additional meetings with Pinecrest Parkway Citizens Committee following the visioning session. Just kind of a check-in, what we learned, where we want to go, the direction. And then we'll be developing an actual draft document of the update to your Pinecrest Park Revision Plan, which will go through a draft review and then a final presentation to council. So all of these meetings are open to the public. It's an opportunity for you to listen and provide input. The presentation is made to the Citizens Committee, and they're directing and guiding us and providing critique and input on a lot of the specificity of what we're doing. And ultimately, it will be their role to recommend the final product to the council for approval. Oh, I forgot this. Sorry. Yeah, the one other thing I wanted to say is that we started looking at overall themes. Things that have come up in all of the meetings, things that have come up with some of our meetings with council members, in our discussions with the community, in these meetings. And this is going to start to frame how we do the vision plan and some of the ideas that we want to promote. So real quickly, and these are things that we can talk about at the visioning session as well, and get your input on. So we've all heard that we want a clear framework for development. So we want to be clear to the community, this is what's expected. And as I said, it's your plan, it's the community's plan, so it's important that the framework is representative of what everybody wants. We want to capitalize on market opportunities. So looking at the 2021 market study, there were opportunities for office and eating establishments and things that the community could support and would likely support, but the money, their discretionary income is being spent elsewhere. And so if we want to look at improvements to Pinecrest and future changes, there's opportunities for the market study specifically for office and eating establishments. We also want to look at the public realm around the transit stations. And in public realm, we talk about placemaking, imagining a place to go that's convenient, that's close, that represents your community. Ensuring, this is really important too, transitions between existing residential neighborhoods and anything new that's built. Even the existing buildings that are in place that have issues with noise, back of house, that's disruptive to the residential. We want to look at transitions and buffers that are appropriate to protect the residential that's there. We also talked about defining a character for Pinecrest Parkway. What does it look like? What can it be? How do we enhance what's there with streetscape, architectural style? Also looking at connectivity. So some of the things we've talked about are establishing a street hierarchy. So how do you walk around the neighborhood? How do you walk around these places? How do you connect them in a way that's comfortable for people walking? And then mixed-use development, the opportunities for new development that, again, is in keeping with the vision of the community, that's consistent with the character of the community, and that grows with the community in line with what you'd like to see.
Don't mean to interrupt, but if you have a mask, if you wear a mask, the village has a policy that masks are required. If you need a mask, we have them here if anybody needs one.
Anyone else? Yes. Is that two?
Yeah, but I'll give some. Would you like one? There you go.
Yes, we're running low, going quick. Did you sign in? I didn't know if you signed in. One more. Melissa, is what your name? Melissa?
Yes,
Melissa, I have a question for you. Are there 4 different plans or there just 2 plans? The difference between first and second? I know you're going to talk about it. I just want to get the idea where you're going. Are you talking about different concepts around US 1? Are you talking about 2 of them? I see 2 of them.
So the plans that we have are focusing on the 3 transit areas, the 2 that are planned, 136th Street and 104th,
Right?
and the existing area around the Daveland stations, and the existing Pinecrest business alternative districts. I know the acronym PDAD, but the Pinecrest business alternative district. But the task of our work is looking at the entire corridor.
No, I know that, but the presentation that you're going to make today, I want to make sure, because there's a concern in terms of public spaces and connection that you talked about, which the citizens are also concerned. So are you focused on those 2 plans that you have right there, or they are?
So, real quick, the Village of Pinecrest adopted a plan for the improvement of Pinecrest Parkway in 2012.
Yes.
10 years ago, there have been different improvements that have been made and changes that have occurred over the course of that time. So the Village Council has engaged the services of these consultants and staff, and Village Council's been involved, others have been involved in the update of the Pinecrest Parkway US 1 vision plan. So that's what the purpose of this study is to update that plan, to look at building mass, building types of land uses, open space, green space, setbacks, etc., signage. But right now, I think the consultants are focusing on the areas adjacent to transit stations where we know there's going to be bus rapid transit stations occurring at Southwest 136th Street on the west side, at 104th Street on the west side, and then there's an existing Metro Rail station, obviously, which is up at the northern part of the village. And then there are these other Pinecrest Business Alternative Districts that are the west side of the on-ramp of Palmetto Expressway and Captain's Tavern, that those are also Pinecrest Business Alternative Districts that already allow mixed-use residential and commercial development. So the focus of this really is on the entire corridor, but there's emphasis on these areas adjacent to the transit stations this evening as a starting point.
Could I ask a fundamental question here, guys?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm just an old-time marketing guy. You know, I still have the title of a vice president of a pretty big company. And here's a really fundamental question. We already have a rapid transit system, i.e. a bus traffic system, okay? We have restaurants at these facilities that we are building right now, 136th Street and 104th Street. This thing's crazy. What percentage of traffic that is on these bus routes right now are using these restaurants that are at these facilities right now? How many of them are leaving the buses and going to Dayland Station, the Dayland Shopping Center, the Dayland, all those restaurants that are right there, that are going to the Fall Shopping Center and eating there, or going to those restaurants there, that are going to Colonial Palms restaurants and all those restaurants? How many of those restaurants are generating traffic off the busway right now? Are the demographics of the people using the busway generating the kind of people who are going to use these places?
Well,
That's a pretty fundamental
Pinecrest
question,
Parkway-
guys.
The Pinecrest Parkway Vision Plan is intended to benefit the village of Pinecrest and its residents.
I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're asking.
The Pinecrest Parkway Vision Plan is intended to benefit the village of Pinecrest and its residents, and obviously there's a lot of traffic that goes down US 1 that generates business along the way.
So you're telling me that that parkway is going to change the traffic? The
I'm not saying that. With regard to transportation, I think there is a
I'm
transportation plan.
I'm not against some kind of change in this, but I think the premise that you're trying to present here, that there's going to be some kind of fundamental change on US 1 as a result of us making these changes, is, I think
Well,
it's
there's
a false premise.
One other piece of information also. Miami-Dade County recently passed an ordinance that requires municipalities, including the village of Pinecrest, to allow for a floor area ratio of 1.0. So we're trying to accommodate and take that into consideration as well. The plan otherwise isn't designed to accommodate all the traffic that's going to be generated on the busway necessarily. That's not our responsibility. But we know that that's going to occur, and so if there's going to be any changes in the development pattern, they're likely going to occur adjacent to those stations. That's all. But there's a lot of work here this evening that the consultants would like to get through, and we just ask that we maybe hold questions until the end, if you don't mind.
Okay, I'm just being.
Sir, what's your name?
Chuck Yiser.
Chuck. So
I've been here for 45 years.
So I haven't met you before. My name is John.
Okay, John.
Okay, and these guys over here, they've all volunteered. They're architects and landscape people.
Great.
So I'm just introducing ourselves because they've introduced themselves. I want you to know what we're here for.
Right.
And what we're trying to do as well is get through the old business of last week, which is what they're doing now. Your question we can add to future business to find out precisely what you're talking about, because I don't think that they're prepared to talk about that just yet. But we can talk about it. We'll talk about it at the next meeting.
I'm
I
just saying-
would appreciate if you guys could just start your presentation. Let's get through it because I know you have a lot of work into this thing.
Okay.
And I
I
then
think it's important that we don't use that as, it was an underlying theme here that somehow this busway is going to help us. It hasn't helped us yet.
So that you understand, there's been 3 prior meetings, and what we've done is we've followed Robert's rules, and we've dealt with the business at hand, and new business we've left to the next meeting,
Okay.
which I think that they'll probably be better prepared to talk about next meeting.
Okay.
Why don't you go ahead?
Okay. I'm going to try not to use the mic. Can everybody hear me in the back? All right, excellent. So after our last conversation a couple of weeks ago, a few points kind of raised to the surface about what would be the next steps or the conversation pieces for this meeting. And the first one, we believe, because there's a lot of conversation about how do you define the character? What does that mean? How does that translate to us? And how is that a benefit to us, right? Because at the end of the day, this effort and what we're recommending is a long-term view of how the corridor is going to develop over time, right? It's not in the next five years. It's going to be a long view. So this is an opportunity to ask ourselves these critical questions about what does our community want to be? What do we want to look like? And what things do we think we want to have or should have to make us successful as a community? And so what we're going to be getting into here today with these first few slides is some of those elements of how you start to define character. And character can be defined in many different ways. I'm going to start. So some of the things that, and these are just questions that we ask ourselves, and we're going to ask you as well when you start thinking about that. Once, single architectural style versus an eclectic mix, right? When you start thinking about the village, is there a particular type of architectural style that resonates with folks? Is that something that helps you be distinguished from neighboring communities, right? Think of it as a branding. This is Village of Pinecrest. Obviously, you have a very unique character with the density that you have, with a lot of established urban canopy. That's very significant and very distinctive in this part of say, Florida. But there's also architectural styles that could be added into that. So is there a desire to maybe lean into a particular type, or is there a way that we could be more eclectic and find some strategy to make that successful, to have a nice balance and flexibility for character, for developers who may come on board and want to do something a little bit different, right? The other thing too is focusing on the landscape or the exterior spaces, right? Again, versus focusing on architecture. What I mean by that is when you go to one of these developments, you're outside, you're celebrating that open space, that community space. Architecture is a backdrop. Doesn't mean that the architecture is necessarily subpar or less of a quality. The importance is in what's happening in the community realm, in the public domain, versus trying to objectify architecture and have the landscape or have the site sort of support the building, right? And so obviously there's blending that can happen between those. You know, in the design world, we like to try to find that balance between inside and outside to make that connection. But sometimes we've seen and we've done on projects where one takes precedent more than the other. So I'd be curious to hear about the preferences for that. The other type is, what type of spaces are needed or do you want that currently you don't have along the corridor, which can make this, visiting these types of elements, heighten the experience, strengthen the character, and maybe even enhance the character and also branding of the community. So these are just some of the questions that we're asking ourselves as we go through these different image boards here. And again, we want to have this conversation so you kind of hear about what's important to you and how that would apply to some of the plans that we have and some of the images that we're also playing. So the first one we have, again, in the development, in the zoning text right now, there are 4 styles that are highlighted. Old Florida, Key West, Mid-Century, and Mediterranean, right? So the first one we're going to look at here is the Old Florida vernacular, right? And so we have examples of some modern takes on what that looks like, right? We also recognize the fact that some of the village's existing architecture, whether it's the parks or other facilities, kind of fall in line with that type of style, utilizing standing seam roofs, a lighter color palette, natural stone to add some warmth and softness to that. And so we thought that this really complemented that well and worked well with that. But also the other aspects that we're looking to do with this as well is architecture design for adding ground floors with residential above. So that's commercial, retail, restaurants on the ground floor on the podium, and then residential above. Glazing on the ground floor to increase the seamless transition between public and private, right? Try to get as much glass and openness as much as possible where it makes sense to really strengthen that indoor-outdoor relationship. Towers on the corners, right? Having a little verticality to pronounce importance on the development or on the development, right? So again, a branding opportunity. Balconies provide architectural interest instead of just a monolithic wall. So that conversation is more about how do we start to break down the box. Step backs, awnings, balconies, those sorts of architectural features, similar to this image up here, really start to make that mass feel smaller, starts to give it some character, and it starts to bring the scale down, right? Those are all good things. Those are all things that we like to do from a design world to add interest, right? And then again, commercial retails on the ground floor with minimal exposure to standalone buildings, and it fits into the character of space. So we're trying to create a critical mass there, right? We're trying to create that village scale, that village feel with the massive architecture. And again, so these are some of the examples that we have. Some of them are, again, commercial on the first floor, residential on top. This building over here is predominantly residential. Again, commercial on the first floor, residential on the top. We're also mindful of how many stories or how many floors that we're showing, again. And we'll get into that here a little bit more about, is it 4, is it 5, is it 6, what feels right? The next, we grouped the Key West and the Mediterranean together. And again, similar to the previous slide, there's a lot of great attributes about this architectural style as well, right? You can see this in a lot of the architecture in the residential homes throughout the community, so it makes a lot of sense, right? And again, there's a lot of great detailing. There's balconies, there's large overhangs that create a lot of shade to promote outdoor use or maximize the outdoor use. Again, large openings of windows on the ground floor, so you have a lot of those, as people are walking through developments, they're kind of doing what our grandparents used to do a lot of storefront watching, looking through the windows, seeing what's in the store, create a lot of activity, right? And then again, introducing the colonnades, balconies. There's a lot of richness in this photo right here that this Mediterranean style has that provides a lot of comfort, a lot of interest, a lot of architectural style and scale to the development, right? And then the other idea is, do we want to go something that's more contemporary? And does that fit? Would that be something that fits with what the community wants as a brand to separate itself from other communities, right? And here are some great examples of whether you have, from a contemporary sense, you have a very contemporary facade, you have contemporary outdoor spaces, and the use of outdoor art to really kind of ground the whole development and define it. There's some really interesting sort of forms and shapes and materials that come along with contemporary modern design that's maybe some of the traditional ones don't have. You can also look at this as a way to create maybe more future art architecture, where it's more of a signature building. So if you have development, you want to have that stand out a little bit more. There's an opportunity where you can use modern or contemporary art to do that. But again, this takes a less traditional approach. It's more forward thinking, more about innovation or leading into the future, if you will. And then we start talking about open space, right? And one thing that we really want to make sure is that we have meaningful open space, spaces where people can come together. And you'll see in the future slide here, we're going to touch on that, about how we can redefine what open space is. And in some zoning text, open space is as simple as a grass strip that's maybe 5 feet wide by 10 feet wide. What value is that really giving you, right? Is there a way that we can redefine that, consolidate that, to have more meaningful open spaces, the chance to have more large tree canopy? There's a lot of character in this community has a lot of great oaks. There's an opportunity to really lean into that and create spaces centered around that, right? Having great streetscapes where there's more green in there, really invite people to walk the streets, right, and have them connect. Right? Again, park spaces where there's a lot of ample shade and opportunities for people to kind of go and rest and sit out, even on a hot day like today. In shaded areas, you can be 5 to 10 degrees cooler. It would be nice to get people out there. Placemaking, art, big. That adds a lot to the character of open spaces, right? And it can be whimsical, it can be more traditional, it doesn't matter. But the introduction of art as a placemaking opportunity is really successful and something that I think we need to promote more so. And then lastly, really having centralized community spaces that are to be defined by architecture, that again, supported by architecture, but it's a multi-purpose space where the community come together for multiple functions. You can have farmers markets, you can have arts fairs, you can have just about anything you want out there for special events. But when it's not a special event, it's still this place that you want people to go to. This adds a lot of value to development. It adds a lot of value to the neighboring businesses and restaurants. This is a key asset for a lot of development in these community spaces. So how can we strengthen that? How can we really allow for that to happen? And more importantly, where does that want to happen within the context of the development? Streetscape character, right? This is sometimes something that's kind of overlooked, I think, by a lot of people. I think in the last couple of years with the pandemic, I think people kind of really recognize the importance of that domain, of utilizing that space as an extension of the outdoors to give more opportunity. But it goes beyond that a little bit too. It goes to what other street typologies should we introduce to kind of help promote scale and connectivity, right? You have the massive scale of US 1 right now, and it's not a very friendly experience. And then you have, more of the residential suburban streets. There's a gap there. There's an opportunity to introduce some more street hierarchy within that vocabulary to kind of help promote more connection, to make it safer, to make it more intuitive, and also to add to the public realm. So these are just some examples that we've done, and also cool where, again, different widths of street, there's our on-street parking, there's their bioswales to help collect water and manage stormwater management. There's a lot of things that we can do there with these streets as we begin to define what they are that add a lot of value to the community and to development. Parking and trails. So again, this is just looking at another way that people can use multimodal as a way to get here instead of relying just on cars. And if they do, making sure that parking facilities are where they need to be and they're able to serve the community and development. So, from a parking garage standpoint, you'll see two examples that we have here. This first one, this is Naples, I believe, where it looks at using more greenery to kind of screen and make the garage, the structure more attractive. That's very successful. We've seen that a lot. The other example is where we either put a liner, or on the first floor, we put some retail and commercial on that, or we skin it and maybe put residential in front of that to kind of minimize the appearance of that parking structure, right? So there's a couple tricks that we could do to kind of integrate parking into the corridor to make it much more serviceable for everybody. But again, lastly, we look at some of these bike trails, multimodal, again, this type of scale right here, I can see happening along US 1, where it's a little bit wider to promote more biking along that corridor. It's not a very attractive pedestrian space today, but we do have a very generous buffer along that corridor where we can take more advantage of that. We put some more green in there. We can make wider pathways to kind of promote more of that sort of longer commute along there for people if they wanted to run, bike, or walk. And then likewise, on the backside, as we get closer to the residential, we can shrink that down and scale a little bit, add a little more landscape in there. Again, provide another avenue for people to be connected, but it's at a different scale because it's adjacent to residential. And I just mentioned again the streetscapes, right? Again, trying to really take advantage of those spaces and try to maximize the value out of them as far as public spaces, seating opportunities, art opportunities, placemaking opportunities, signage and wayfinding, lighting, right? There's a lot that happens within that environment, and so how can we really leverage that to really make it much more impactful? So the next thing that we have, and again, it was another question that was talked a lot at the last meeting, just as a lead into this. Currently, right now, the way that the code is written, the max FAR that you're allowed to have, again, that's floor area ratio, is 0.73. What our charge is, and the question is, because of what the county is doing, they want us to look at a minimum of 1.0 FAR. So what does that mean? How do we get there? What would that look like? And so these next few slides look at, all right, well, what works in your current text today that we don't need to change? The second slide that we're going to have is, what do we need to consider to allow for that to happen and to be still successful and still to have very quality high-end development? Okay?
Can we have a discussion on the characteristic that we finished, or do we?
I would like, if we could, because this is a continuation of like the last 3 meetings.
Yes.
So they've had this bottled up for a little bit, and so let's just let them have the opportunity.
No problem.
And I think that this is going to answer a lot of questions that came up in the last meeting about FAR and that delta between 0.73 and 1 is where you're going.
Because I think the characteristic is very important.
But well, we're going to get to
Yes.
that. I think everyone's concern is density and the FAR is.
Yeah. What's the effect of going to the minimum of 1.0 FAR?
May I ask, I'm sorry, I was not here for the last meeting, I apologize if it was said, but the 1.0, achieving 1.0 from 0.73, whatever it is that count the whole village or just the commercial?
It's only
The FAR 1.
It's only, what we're looking at right now are the development districts. So we're looking at South Dayland right now, we're looking at 104th and 136th.
So the 1.0 FAR does not include
Does not include,
residential.
does not include any residential, right? Residential is excluded from that.
The county ordinance asks for a 1.0 FAR basically for the first quarter mile from the transit way, which includes all of our commercial properties. It's the commercial corridor, not anything east of the route.
Okay. Yeah, one more question.
Let me, because we've had a couple board members that aren't here. Could you maybe just review for us the transition that exists between the US 1 on the front side and the FAR, and in the back side, the FAR is less than?
Yeah.
Just for a moment.
Yeah,
It doesn't have to be very like.
So based on the county's overlay that they're proposing, we have at 136, so the intersection of US 136, they would like to see a requirement of 1.5 FAR around the station, stepping down to 0.5. Okay, in that, that's what, a quarter mile, right? The rest of the corridor, actually along US 1, there is a 0.1 FAR within the first quarter mile, which Steve.
1.0.
1.0 within the first quarter mile.
What does FAR stand for?
Yeah.
Yeah, let me, yeah, that was a hot topic last time. So it stands for floor area ratio. So
Why don't you go over it again,
Yeah.
explain what the doubling effect or the tripling effect?
Right? It will be confused. The 1 point applies to all the floors, right?
I can explain real quickly what floor area ratio is. If you have a 2,000 square foot building on a 4,000 square foot lot, that is a floor area ratio of 0.5. It's the ratio of floor area to lot area. It's just a mathematical computation. If you have 10,000 square feet of floor area, whether it's on 1 floor, 2 floors, or 3 floors, 10,000 total square feet of floor area on a 10,000 square foot lot would be a floor area ratio of 1. So you could either have a 1-story, 10,000 square foot building on a 10,000 square foot lot. That wouldn't look very attractive. It would be lot line to lot line to lot line to lot line with no parking, no landscaping. But that's an FAR 1.0. But if you're going to require landscaping and parking, then maybe you go to a 2-story building, 5,000 on each floor. That's 10,000 square feet on a 10,000 square foot lot. That's 1.0 FAR. Or 2,500 square feet of floor area on 4 stories. That still gives you 10,000 square feet of floor area on a lot. So it's just it's the ratio and proportion of lot area to floor area.
Buildable area.
Not ground floor area, but all floors.
It tells you the density, like how many people are going to be.
Does that answer your question?
No,
No?
I've never attended any of these meetings and I'm.
So I'm going to just interject one thought. The FAR is a variable that allows us, the community, to control how much density you could potentially have on a lot. All right? If you have a very small lot, there's a limitation because it's too small. If you have a large lot, it controls how much you could build on that. So it's a number that most designers talk about kind of like as the rule that sets how in many cases how tall the building could be or how wide the building could be and so forth. All right? So it's a variable. It's simply a variable.
So say something, because you know what? Why don't you do it from a practical standpoint? All you have to do is say, here's a building that's 0.73, and here's a building that's 1.0. Now you see the difference? It's so simple. Why don't you do the practical part instead of talking about theoretical? Just show us 2 buildings and we're done.
So to that point.
What's the difference between 0.73 and 1.0? Good.
So in the last meeting that we had, we actually had these 3 areas that we did a study of them of what the current FAR was, right, which is 0.73. Our analysis said, based on the current conditions, the current development wasn't even at 0.73. It was actually less. It was more around 0.5, right? So that question, when we shared those illustrations, the question then became, well, what does it take to get to 1.0, right? And that's what these diagrams are here to show you today. Taking that leap from what's there today to what would 1.0 look like. So all of these diagrams right here that you see, and we'll get to those here in a minute, speak to the impacts of 1.0 FAR on these different parcels. So that's the leap that we're making today.
One question, 1.0, is the maximum or is the minimum?
The minimum.
It's the minimum.
It would be the maximum for us, the minimum for
It's the
them.
maximum for us, but it's the minimum for the county.
Correct.
The county ordinance requires a minimum FAR of 1.0, I'm quite sure, but it's a maximum for us. We're proposing nothing more than the minimum that the county requires, which is 1.0.
The other way you can think, higher the floor area ratio, you're going to have more parking, more people, more traffic. So this is the way it really works, in terms of all those things.
So let's continue with your presentation. I'm sure you're gonna have imagery up there that's gonna describe the delta between .73 and .1. So just get through it, let's get through this opportunity that we've talked about FAR a little bit, the concept of what it is and where it's gonna go. Why don't you go ahead?
So in our analysis, so when we studied the existing conditions compared to what you see over here on the easels, it was our determination from the existing text, things that do not need to change. The first one being maintain the current setbacks. So there's a very clear definition of what the different setbacks off of US 1, side streets, or adjacent residential. None of that needs to change. Those are more than adequate to be able to get and still have a viable development site, right? So we're maintaining those. The second thing that we saw is maintaining the existing upper level setbacks. So there's language in there about when you go up to a second floor, you have to step back X feet. You don't need to change that. In fact, we're recommending that you would continue that forward, right? So that's another positive. That's good because it helps to break down the scale again, and it helps to make that sort of, if you have a building that's 2 or 3 stories adjacent to residential, whether it's multi-family or single family, it's going to help minimize the impact, the visual impact of that.
Yeah,
on
but we
those
have a
adjacent
very
uses.
little time in reality.
I'm sorry?
Let him get through just continue, get through the the positives.
The other thing that your text really is promoting is a walkable village environment. And in fact, we're looking to enhance this even more so. So we're maintaining this and actually building upon that and making the connectivity easier for walkability, biking, and other modes of transportation. So that we're continuing forward. So that does not change. Now, what does change, or what we think would help make this development more successful, and again, we're looking to just maintain a high quality standard, but still achieve that 1.0, right? So the first thing, again, I touched on this earlier, is redefining or making more clear the definition of what meaningful green space is. I think that's really important, right? Right now, I think there's a range of 10, 12, 14% of open space, depending on how it's classified. Again, beyond that, it really doesn't stipulate what type of green space that wants to be. And so one of the things we're looking at is reflect high quality and minimize open spaces, so plazas, pocket parks, landscape buffers, those sorts of things. Put those in there, require those types of open space uses. The other thing that we're looking to propose is more mixed use. Right now, there's very limited on the amount of mixed use they can have. So what we mean by that is, again, commercial retail on the first floor, office or retail on the second floor, so on and so forth. So you get a little bit more mixed use within a building footprint. The other one is, when we start looking at the last two, it centers around parking, right? So when we look at this, there would be a need right now. Structured parking is not allowed, but in order to achieve this, there would be opportunities or needs to add structured parking in different locations. That is above ground and below ground, right? And we're looking to put a cap on that of 4 levels if it's above ground. We're also looking at and utilizing best practices of transit-oriented development, TOD parking, as a way to help balance out the parking needs. Because again, a lot of people that would be living in this type of development would utilize mass transit more so than the car than most people would in a residential standpoint. So looking at the ratios of residential, commercial, and office, tweaking those based on best practices to fine tune and allow the parking that needs to happen, but not be excessive. So these 4 things are the big takeaways that we're seeing that would help ease the transition to a 1.0 FAR. So now I get the question.
That last thing you could describe, that diagram, the minimum required, maximum required. What is that? Is that your proposal as to parking?
This source is from Atlanta, Georgia. Again, these are best practices that was used there, right? And so this would be a starting point for determining what is the right ratios for this condition, for this community, based on these uses. I don't think we have, at this point in time, came to an agreement of what those would be. We include this as an example so you can see minimum required versus maximum required. So all of that leads to the build-out scenarios, again, which are these boards over here. And again, I want to stress that these plans that we have, we're not proposing these, we're not suggesting that this is the development that has to happen in these locations. These are scenarios where we're able to test through different priorities, different thoughts of how these parcels can be developed, how they can reach some of the goals that we think are important as far as character, as far as quality of open space, introduction of street hierarchy, right? And again, achieving that minimum 1.0 FAR. So the first one we're going to start at, and this is an existing condition, so this is an aerial, this is a Dayland South Station, right? So we're going to be looking at the frontage here along US 1. There's some parcels in here just off. Most of our efforts are going to be focused on this triangle here where there's a CVS, Ross Dress for Less, and a FedEx. And there's some apartments here and some, I believe this is the parking lot, overflow parking. The boundary that we have actually, that's proposed in the last division plan extends further, includes some of these multifamily homes. But we did not include those as far as our studies for a couple of reasons. One, ownership issues. I think we want to go to the next one. So here's an ownership diagram. The orientation, this has changed. North is to the right, just so you know. So again, you can start to see the different owners, condominiums and multiple owners. We stayed away from condominiums and we stayed from multiple owners because there would be difficulty in acquiring that land. And for this exercise, we wanted to focus on what would be more plausible as far as acquiring and consolidating ownership land to do these developments. So we excluded anything that had multiple ownership.
Excuse me, to clarify. So when you say multiple owners, like, let's say number 42, that's not one owner, there's many more in there?
Yes, yes.
So you don't know how many owners?
I mean, it says.
Right, so it's either, each square is a different ownership, so 42, it looks like, that looks like some kind of residential or office piece, but
Is it one owner?
that piece of land is one ownership. One
42 is one owner. So all the boxes that are green are one owner?
okay.
No.
Yeah.
41, 42, 27, 25, and 26. Those are all residential. 25 and 26, from what we can determine from the auditor's webpage, those are apartments. So they are owned by a single owner, but the tenants do not own them. Whereas 27, 42, 41, and 36, all multifamily with multiple owners.
So it could be a corporation or real estate investment trust, but it's not a condominium, it's not owned by individual.
Yeah, so there's multiple owners in there, right?
Excuse me, but they need to include specifically the exact street number, for example, 67th Avenue, and it's not on that chart there, so I'm trying to figure it out, because this is all what, east of the highway?
So yes, US 1, we're east of that.
Like 42, what street is that, for example?
That's on Kendall. Kendall Drive.
Yeah,
Kendall and 68.
yeah, it is.
We need to include specific street.
We can have those streams.
Can you point out the CVS? That might help.
CVS is right here with 30. You want to go back to the next slide? So I apologize, we're changing the orientation on this, but orientation is due north. So here's Pinecrest Parkway. Here's 88 right here. CVS is right at that corner.
So that's number 42, the green one that you're talking about? If you
This
go to the next
was
slide.
No,
30.
yeah.
So CV
42 is right there.
41 is right here.
42, yeah.
Right there. 30, 36, 41, 42, 25, 26, 27,
Point out 88.
88.
88. And then 68 Avenue is the one in the way.
68.
Are you sure the commercial area, existing commercial area is not?
This is existing condition. This is,
Can you delineate where the existing commercial areas are, where these are?
I couldn't hear you, sorry.
Can you delineate, can you show with the finger where the actual commercial areas are located?
Yes. Commercial is primarily in this triangle here. There's commercial, obviously along the parkway. And there's commercial, some commercial in this zone right here. Multifamily, 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 apartments, multifamily.
So what is that, you're gonna do away with all these?
No, just to be clear.
We all know all this. Why are you talking about everything that we already know? Those requirements that it says.
Because they want to increase the density.
You want to show little boxes with it being green? Are you talking about ripping down?
No, sir, no. So, we're showing those ownership map, and because the one thing that we're teasing out or looking at to verify is the limits of what these districts want to be. Currently, the way that the current vision plan has, it includes the multifamily development in that boundary. We are proposing not to touch those multifamily and focus solely on the commercial for the purposes of this study.
Okay.
We're not proposing to tear anybody's house down or residential. We're not proposing any of that.
Can I add something?
Yes.
All of this property is privately owned property, and every property owner has certain rights as provided within the zoning code of the Village of Pinecrest. So if it's zoned commercial, you can go to the commercial zoning district. In the land development regulations, it tells you exactly what uses are permitted, exactly what heights are permitted, exactly what setbacks are required, exactly how many parking spaces are required. And those owners enjoy those rights, and nobody's going to interfere with them. What we would propose to do is to allow, if an owner wants to come along and redevelop in the future according to a plan that's approved by the Village of Pinecrest, that could be permitted if the plan is put into place for that. But we're not talking about taking anybody's property or redeveloping any property at all. That's privately owned property, and a property owner has the right to develop according to existing zoning and any changes that are implemented in the future.
But will it impact it?
Now, let me mention something, because everything we're seeing is east of US 1, right? On the west, already some apartment buildings are being built. The shorty side is going to be 2 towers connected to the bridge. So isn't that part of Pinecrest too? No. So it's always from the US 1 to the east. Even if the zip code is the same.
Yeah, our exercise, that's not Pinecrest. We are not looking at that development. We're not proposing anything there that's outside of our purview for this exercise.
So these are just study areas.
Yes.
Okay.
So, as we look at that, the first plan, first scenario that we want to share with you, again, to kind of tease out how can we achieve a 1.0 FAR on the commercial property only. Again, it's faint, I apologize, the board's a little bit clearer, but there's a pink line that you see here. That pink line represents what the vision plan currently calls out for this district. Again, our focus is on the commercial, not the multifamily, not any of the residential. So what we're looking at to do here with this development, again, looking at open space, looking at architectural massing, looking at introducing street hierarchy, what could we do, say for example, if a developer came in here and acquired all these parcels and consolidated, what could they do? If someone came in here and consolidated all those commercial properties, what could they do? Likewise along Pinecrest Parkway, right? Again, we're not proposing that this is what's happening, but this is how we are able to kind of test these solutions, right? So overall, this plan represents 435 residential units. It has 135,000 square feet of commercial, 700 parking spaces, which are split both between surface and structure, and it achieves the overall FAR of 1.0. How that translates to the 3 different blocks. So in block number 1, which is along the parkway and including these townhomes here, We are at 0.94 FAR, so we're slightly lower than the 1. Max stories that we're looking at for this is 2 to 3 stories, with a total of 40,000 square feet of commercial, 80 residential units, 142 parking spaces that are all accomplished on the surface.
Why 2 or 3 stories?
Because of the area that we have with the open space requirements and achieving that 1.0 FAR. That 1.0 FAR is what's locking us in. It's what's determining what we can and can't do, right? So that's why we're limited to the 1 to 2 to 3 stories. Now, we could go higher if we wanted to, and we have a plan that shows that. It will have an impact on the amount of architecture or fabric, as we like to call it, right? There's more green, less buildings, that sort of thing.
You will be able to provide more amenities besides.
You could, yeah, and so that's a good question too, right? Because there's advantages to going higher because it allows more space on the ground plane to take advantage of, right? The trade back with that is how high do you want to go? How high does the community want to see, how tall they want to be? Do they want to go 6 stories? Do they want to go 5 stories? What is that what is that sweet spot, right? So moving forward, block number 2, again, this is the larger block where there's opportunity to do more. And so again, we're looking to introduce some more district level streets, again, improve connectivity, introduce some more green space. So this green space is fronted on US 1, the corner of US 1 and 88, to make that be more of a possible gateway as you drive in from the community from the north. We have mixed use building here, which is shown in orange with residential in the back, and it's being serviced by a parking structure. On the north side, we have another mixed use building that has 1 level of subsurface and then a modest structure above that. We also have at the very top mixed use with surface. And then for block 3, we're at 1.0 FAR, 3 stories max, 17,000 square feet of commercial, 149 residential units, 137 parking spaces that are all achieved on the surface.
Matt, currently, if you go back, so when you describe the dwellings per acre, right? At each one of those, what is the current allowable dwellings per acre?
So right now, it's from a residential standpoint. The areas that we're looking at right now, there's only residential on this corner right here, and it's relatively low. What we're proposing as far as we are increasing the density, because obviously there's not residential there, but it is less density than what the existing surrounding context is. So while it's being increased, we're not maximizing it as what's here, it's slightly lower than that.
So that little square over there, that you pointed is residential now, the one yellow square there.
Here?
Yeah, well, you're saying that it's zone commercial, but happens to be residential now?
It's residential right now. It's I believe it's apartments at this point in time.
Right, but I thought you said you're excluding residential.
Yes, we decided to keep this one in there. Sorry for that confusion. We decided to add this because it was a single owner, and if there's an opportunity to maximize that, to take or optimize the development of that to create a better space, that's why we looked at it.
So, but if it's residential, can we lock in as residential, not meet the 1 point FAR? Why do we have to change that? I mean, you're saying that you're making us do our commercial to exclude
We
residential.
can absolutely exclude that. This was us taking a look at trying to create as much of a holistic development community center as much as possible. That can be excluded. We can take that out and focus again on block 2 and block 1. Again, this is us teasing out different scenarios.
Well, I understand that, but what I'm concerned about is that if you add it in, right, that it becomes an option in the future to be changed. Meaning, when you say you're excluding it, does that mean that, I understand, just for your purposes of looking at things, you're excluding it from our view now or our calculations now, but what I'm trying to say is, if it's possible for someone to come in and knock it down and put it commercial, is that possible now?
No.
Okay, so then we should just, move on from the group, right? Then we should lock it in
I appreciate
To
that.
be clear that you're proposing to increase the density on that particular residential unit. In case of the future, that one owner would like to knock it down, he has the ability to build more units where less units are currently there. I think that's the question.
We're not proposing that.
You're not proposing to increase the density on that?
We're not
one?
proposing
Okay.
that. We're in some ways, we're looking at, worst case scenario, what could someone do? And we're trying to find that balance.
But that's the question, I mean, they have the right to do that, mostly.
No.
And why are we doing it?
We haven't made any recommendations with regard to land use or intensity right now, other than the 1.0 FAR. This study is just to show what the possibilities are.
From a real simple standpoint, I think the one big concern that this community has is density. They're concerned about density. Why don't you talk about the main issue, and then we can talk about everything else that's under the sun. But let's get to the density issue. Simple. I heard you say a minimum of 1.0 FAR, minimum, and I heard our zoning director say 1.0 maximum. Please define if it's minimum or maximum, and if it's minimum, what is the maximum? Can we go to 10.0? So let's clarify that.
Right
Steve,
now,
can I answer for you?
Yeah.
The Miami-Dade County minimum is 1.0. The Pinecrest maximum is 1.0. I don't know why that is confusing.
We're talking about the county, we're talking about the city.
Because the county has the ability to impose on all municipalities certain things. Okay? And the statement here is that the county minimum is 1.0 FAR, and Pinecrest has decided that their maximum is 1.0.
Well, that's not, the minimum is 1.0 in the ordinance that was passed at first reading by Miami-Dade County.
Correct.
That's correct. Right now, the village's land development regulations allow a maximum of 0.73 if you have a 4-story building. But if and so we don't know what the village council is going to do in the future. Presumably, they're going to have to comply with the 1.0 minimum. And
Okay, and I just want to ask a question for clarity again. The 1.0 FAR is irrespective of whether it's residential, commercial, office, etc.?
Yes.
Is it always a quarter mile from the other one?
Correct.
So that piece of land might be redeveloped at 1.0, the residential one.
and there's
It
just
is
one.
within a quarter mile of the other one.
And there's just one caveat to 1.0 FAR is the minimum, but there's a provision in the Land Development Code of Miami-Dade County that would say in that ordinance that would allow you to have less than 1.0 FAR as necessary to protect the adjoining single-family residential districts. So you wouldn't necessarily have to have 1.0 if it's going to have a negative impact on the adjoining residents. So the trick would be that he would design it to allow for 1.0 where possible, but to include safeguards to protect the residences to the east.
If there's no limit on the maximum, if we talk minimum, what's the maximum?
The maximum right now is 0.73.
So what is?
We don't know what the maximum is going to be because the village council hasn't considered any of this yet, really, in public hearings. Our recommendation is we don't know. I mean, it's going to be up to the committee to decide in terms of what their recommendation is going to be. Then it's going to be up to the village council to decide what the final product is going to be.
That is going to be 1.0.
We're in the process of making a recommendation. We're just in the process of looking at this and studying this to determine what,
But the problem is, the companies in Miami-Dade County is doing 1.0, and we're not going to do the 4, which was already said in the meeting. It's going to be 1.0, right? I mean, you all agree on it's going to be 1.0.
So,
Right?
at this point, no one has decided anything. We're listening. We're fact finding. And at this point, the consultant, Matt, right?
Yes.
You're in the middle of a thought between this slide and the next slide
Yes.
as a demonstrative
Yeah.
of what you're trying to get across.
So,
And I'd like to see if you could just sort of get through the next slide so we can see the comparative.
but yeah, and I guess, let me go back to where we started based on the last conversation. There was a lot of question about what does it look like to go from 0.73 to 1? So that's the answer we're looking to get to today, right? To show you what does 1.0 FAR look like if there were to be development on there. I'm not saying that that's the right thing to do. I'm not saying at this point in time, we're not recommending, yeah, 1.0 FAR is what it needs to be, or 1.5 or whatever, right? We're trying to answer that question. 1.0, what is the impact it's going to have on this community? And how can we address that? What are the different tools that we can do? That's the conversation that we want to have today.
So can you continue?
It's gonna go to 1. I mean, we've already mentioned, you said that he's gonna show us what the change is gonna be. So let's just move on and say it's gonna be 1, and the rest of the county, that our commissioners say 1.5, right? So the minimum is gonna be is 1.
And the maximum is gonna be 1.
All right, so
It's the
sorry,
same.
Is it the same or?
folks,
No, they can
folks.
decide it too, actually. It's up to them.
So let me just, point of order,
Let's hope that-
gentlemen, a point of order, all right? This man is in the middle of his presentation, and I would like to hear it, because we here have not made a decision on anything, or we haven't recommended anything. We are in the process in the last 3 weeks, and I'm just gonna finish this thought, and I'm gonna move on to you, sir. And I want to maintain order, because at some point, we're gonna leave this meeting, and we still have other information to cover after this. So if you would not, please,
Yes.
continue with your presentation.
All right, so the
And
next.
I'd like to, and I want to also add, I'm also going to add, that I would appreciate if we could hold the rest of the questions until you're done. And then we could ask questions. I think that everybody wants to ask questions, including you. Let's go ahead.
So the next scenario we're going to look at, again, what does it take to get to 1.0 FAR, but what can we do from a development standpoint that is more context and village friendly, for example. So again, the biggest change that we're looking at here, again, 1.04 FAR, that's what this scenario is saying. Again, achieving the 1.0 FAR is relatively easy. Not only that, but overall the stories are relatively low. 1 to 2 stories on block 1, 2 to 3 on 2, and again, 3 stories on block 3. The biggest thing that we're looking at here is where do we want to put the open space? Do we have enough connectivity from the roads? Do we try to rearrange the building masses to make it feel more part of the context? So again, in this one, we're looking to introduce more meaningful open space here on block 1 that could be shared by these uses here, which is mixed use and residential. This does have underground parking associated with this, but also has ground level as well. So on block 1, there's 41, almost 42,000 square feet of commercial, 93 residential units, and 158 parking separated from surface, underground, and ground level. Okay? Block 2 is probably the biggest change, where we're taking the gateway green open space that's at the corner and move it back to engage more with 88 and 68 so that these developments, these multifamily have more direct access to that, trying to create a center here instead of a center there, and seeing how the architecture would respond to that, how the roadway network would respond to that. And so again, block 2, we're achieving 1.09 FAR, 2 to 3 stories, 93,000 square feet of commercial, 207 residential units, 456 parking, again, both from surface to underground. Underground is primarily here in the front half of Pinecrest Parkway. Similar to concept 1, we are looking at replacing the existing apartments with townhomes and also multifamily. Again, a different mix to kind of help bring some of the density down. Again, it also helps step down more appropriately, perhaps, to the context. Scheme 3 looks at a more inward focus as far as how do we develop this with a green space and open space. Again, overall, we're actually slightly less than the 1.0. We're at 0.97 on average for these 3 blocks. With block 1, again, 2 to 3 stories, 62,000 square feet of commercial, almost 50,000 square feet of office. We've introduced some office into this block. That's a change. 12 residential units and 89 parking spaces, all done on surface. So in this block, we've taken out the residential that was along Pinecrest Parkway and put in office. And the residential that we have here is predominantly townhome development. On block 2, this is again 1.0 FAR, 2 to 3 stories. This block in all 3 schemes so far has been around the 2 to 3 stories height. 113 square feet of commercial, 136 residential units, and 320 parking spaces, again, both surface and garage. Garage being located right here off of 88. Likewise, in block 3, again, we've introduced more townhomes here, trying to be mindful of the density, trying to bring that down and have it fit a little bit better with the context. So 3 stories here, 17,000 square feet of commercial, primarily up at the top corner, 108 residential units or 130 spaces, all achieved on surface parking. The last one that we have, because we wanted to look at, well, what if we go higher, right? Because everything so far predominantly, especially on block 2, this is the focus. What if we go from 2 to 3 stories to 1 to 6 stories? You know, try to get 4, 5, 6 stories in there. And so as you can see, as we go higher, so these are mixed use and these are standalone 1-story retail spaces. You see a lot more green. We still need a parking structure to be able to service those. We still have an internal green space with introducing new street typologies there. We have a little bit more surface parking on the back sides of both of those. So the big takeaway on this plan is what's the impact of going higher but still achieving that 1.0 FAR. Again, that's the trade-off, right? You can go higher, you can get a little more space in the ground plane, you get a little more green, probably increase some of your buffers, right? But your buildings are taller. So I think that's a really interesting conversation for us to kind of tease out and kind of understand, does that make sense? Or do we need to be more in line with the 3 previous schemes where we're a little bit lower, have a little bit more fabric, there's a little bit more sense of a village scale, and a little more spaces, that sort of thing? What's the priority? The next piece that we're going to look at is the 104th Street station. So Pinecrest north is this way, 104th is right here. Flagler Grove Park is right here, and we're going to be looking primarily at this portion here. Today, again, I apologize, north is to the right with Pinecrest running east-west, and then here's 104th. So you can see who owns these. There's a condo association. There's also some multiple ownership. 7-Eleven here, and Sunshine Date Investments there. Okay. Again, north is back to the top of the page. 104th is here. Most of what we can do is on the north side. There isn't much opportunity to happen on the south side, just because of this building looks like it's recently renovated. Doesn't make a lot of sense to recommend any changes to that. It looks like it's a great renovation, but there's an opportunity perhaps to capitalize on this corner a bit more than maybe a gas station, right? So that is represented in block 1 here with 2 stories, 10,000 square feet of commercial, 18 parking spaces. Yes.
I think that you need to look into that area, into that block, because I was doing some analysis there, and basically the commercial, because we need to have both healthy residential but also healthy commercial. And the health, I don't think that the commercial there are surviving very well, because I think that they need parking. I see an encroachment into the residential area, and I think that we really need to analyze that block in more detail, because I think that there is a need to expand the commercial area.
Yeah, so this
on
one
on the south side.
On the south side,
Right.
well, there's our limits to the south are right here, as far as what our study area is.
Right.
All of this is residential, which
Yeah, but they are transitional, because the commercial area is invading into the residential area.
are you speaking of along here on the border?
Right, I think that
Again,
we need to analyze it a little bit in more detail.
I understand that, but that's for
And I
this
think that you
section.
need to recommend maybe some zoning change.
Okay.
I really,
We can do that, we'll look at that. For the north half, in both schemes, we're trying to take advantage of the park as an asset, but also be mindful of, again, the multifamily that we have here. So we go from these are 2 to 3 stories, mixed use here at the corner, retail ground floor, residential above, and then we have multifamily and then townhome development that would front onto that park with a new neighborhood street, if you will, connecting 102nd and 104th, right? Again, trying to see if there's another way that we could improve circulation so you don't have to go out the Pinecrest Parkway. There might be other ways that you can kind of navigate.
Are you also proposing in all the schemes of public spaces?
Yes.
Because earlier when you talked about the characteristic of
Yes.
the Pinecrest, you talked about style of architecture, but you didn't get into what will happen if you do any of these proposals. So you have to have some sort of three-dimensional ideas going on.
Yes.
So that the public can see what the implication is, even though you spend a lot of time on the floor area ratio. I think that's very important.
That's the next step.
Yeah.
That's a good question. So again, we want to get feedback based on these concepts, not only for the vision section, what's next, but as we get into design, where we will start representing these ideas in more than 3 dimension, right? So you can start to get the feel, the scale, the step back of the building, the heights of the buildings, the quality of the open space, how they relate to one or the other, right? That's the next step.
Can you do for all proposals so people can see?
We are intending to do it for all 3 areas that we are sharing with you today. So these 3 districts.
I think that would be nice because then people can see what impact
I-
this floor area ratio is going to do. What
We agree. We're trying to have a process here and stick to the
I think
process.
public has a concern because the people are beginning to understand 0.73 and 1.
Yes.
So we have to show them, hey, if we do this, what's going to happen to the transportation, what's going to happen to the parking, what's going to happen to all these kind of things. I think that's very important. And that'll give them the characteristic, not the style of architecture. I think that's very important.
The style is a little bit hard, but you can start to get the feel for the type of development, the scale, the spaces, the quality of spaces. That, again, that's our next step.
Yes.
Can I just interject real quick?
Thank you.
There's been a lot of focus and attention on the 1.0 FAR because of the county's RTC ordinance
Yes.
that they passed at first reading just in June. But the charge and the responsibility of this committee is going to be to look at the entire parkway. You have to take the county's ordinance into consideration, but it's to develop a plan for the entire corridor. And so I think what Mr. Manda is showing you is how you can achieve the 1.0. But it is possible, and maybe it's not something that you're going to recommend, but maybe down at 136 you allow for a higher FAR, lower FARs elsewhere, maybe higher at 136, and maybe it's less than 1.
Yeah.
And if we can get to an average 1.0, the hope is that the county will accept that. But the ultimate recommendations in terms of heights, densities, and locations, that I think is the next step in the responsibility of this committee to decide what you want to recommend to the village council. This is just shows you how you might get to 1.0 because it has been such a topic of
Mr.
focus and
My main
conversation.
concern is the public should be able to see what they're getting into it.
Right.
Because it was very confusing for them. So the next step will be very important.
They showed last time, three-dimensional.
Go.
Okay.
Did you continue?
So,
Thank you.
When you said average 1.0, just let me go back, let's take a step back. You're just looking at these areas to get the average to 1.0, right? Of all the whole corridor. Is that right?
Our primary focus, as we talk about the 1.0, are these districts, these 3 areas right now. We have not looked
Is
at
the
them.
number 1.0 on that specific block there, or is it on the complete corridor of 1.0?
It's the 1.0 would be for this whole area that we have outlined here.
And then, so one more question, I'm just going to go back. So below, going south there after the gas station, on US 1, you have all those small, yes, exactly. But I know it's not your mandate, but is this supposed to be part of this vision plan to look at those and say, hey, if I want to knock down the wall that's there, I want to put something in. What laws are they going to follow? Are they going to do a 1.0? What, I mean, you know what I'm saying? I know it's not your mandate, but I mean, they're horribly ugly looking, right? You know, there's an animal clinic there, there's a funeral parlor there, there's a big Toyota dealership going down. I mean, the vision plan should be the corridor, right? We talk a lot of this smaller stuff. What about them? When do they come into play? Or we don't look at it, we just vote.
Right now, the consultants are focusing on these areas because they're adjacent to transit stations that are going to be built in the future. The update to 2012, the Pinecrest Parkway US 1 Vision Plan update is going to look at the entire corridor. It's going to look at the entire corridor.
I think that as a point of departure, the larger parcels as test models to the theory of the increase is where the concern was. All right, and I think that once we get through generating the imagery that's behind these three concepts, or these various concepts, there will be a moment that we can now look at the smaller parcels in the vein of the theory that leads us to the architecture we're trying to prepare. Because the smaller parcels, they can't generate the type of density as these primary ones. So let me just finish the thought. Let me just get the thought across. So what we're trying to understand by creating this hypothesis, all right? Because right now, all he's done is establish a hypothesis. What is our extreme possibility, and what is the extreme versus where we are now, which is 0.73 to 1, all right? So he's going to create the hypothesis. He's going to create imagery that backs it up. And at some point, there's going to be an effort to reimagine it by other people, to see if in fact what we think is going to happen will happen. And there will be that effort to do a charrette of some kind so that everybody can determine, based on the variables we're using, whether it could work for the entire corridor. But I think that right now, when he says it's his task, he's looking at these larger parcels which can create the most happiness or the most destruction.
But
really, that's where we're
my
at.
question. If we're talking about larger parcels, why don't we have Sunnyland? Why don't we have the Best Buy place? Why don't we have Kendall Toyota instead of a corner with a gas station?
So if I may, I think the question, I think I want to clarify what maybe was being asked here. You are focusing on the three areas where the county has stated or existing metro rail stations are coming. Okay, those are the focus of his presentation, but I think it's a valid question to say, is the 1.0 FAR only in those things, or is it all along the highway, all the way down in front of Sunnyland Shopping Center, the Toyota dealer, all these little buildings along south of 104th?
Right.
I'm assuming that is.
The county's ordinance, when it talks about a 1.0 FAR, they're talking about a quarter mile on either side of the busway. So in
Of the
Pinecrest,
busway, not the station.
So in Pinecrest, it would be a quarter mile, basically east of the BRT busway, which happens to include and encompass all of our commercial properties.
Correct.
So it's not the metro rail, it's the bus station.
Correct.
It's the
whole
busway.
Okay, but the busway has a lot of stops.
No, but it's the busway, it's the whole edge of US 1, all the way from 80th Street down to 136.
And it does include that the criteria prevents encroachment into the residential.
Yeah, there's a provision that says they want a 1.0 FAR east of the busway and west of the busway on either side of the center line. But they don't expect you to, they don't want you to allow for any floor area ratio or density that's going to have a negative impact on the residences to the east. And as you know, almost all the property east of the commercial corridor is residential. And Matt wanted me to remind the the committee that in that ordinance, they also talk about a floor area ratio of 1.5 within the community urban centers at the center, and then it transitions down to 0.5. The center of those community urban centers are generally outside, they are outside the village of Pinecrest, and then within that circle, each of those community urban centers, I think there are 3, it tapers down to 0.5. So for all intents and purposes, our floor area ratio that's going to be applicable to Village Pinecrest is generally 1.0 along the entire corridor. And we're focusing on these areas because they're adjacent to transit stations.
The next idea, again, just looks at slight different configuration of the north piece. Again, trying to figure out what's the right development to step down to the adjacent residential. Also take advantage of the park where we have more of a direct sort of view as you drive in, focus on that park. We still introduce a secondary street, a neighborhood street, if you will. Townhomes, multifamily, commercial here. Unlike the previous one, there's structured parking associated with that as well. This road that you can see here would be more akin to an alley condition. So the thought is that these townhomes would be serviced from the rear garages, so you wouldn't see garages from the front. The last piece, and the reason why I wanted Stephen to mention the community urban zone is that there's a station right here that's where that's being planned. So there's a big bubble around here which would designate that to be the community urban zone, where at its core, as he mentioned, would be 1.5 FAR, but as we move out, it would step down to 0.5. So unlike the previous 2 areas, this one has that wrinkle to it, it has that overlay. However, we think that this one could easily accommodate that because of the amount of space that we have. The opportunity here is much greater to really create that town center, urban core, if you will. And so again, I think everybody's familiar with this. This is the Home Depot, Publix, and the Macy's, right? And then there's various out parcels, commercial, as you go north. For the sake of our study, we are basically going from 136, obviously, the Pinecrest, to this western edge of the residential, all the way up to basically to the south of Sunnyland Park.
Matt, I think it's very important that the urban zone characteristic can be built with the overall scheme, because otherwise what's going to happen is you're going to have piecemeal things going on.
Yeah.
And the confusion is going to be in the traffic congestion and some of the other things.
Yeah.
So is that going to happen given the urban zone right away, or is that down the road, time-wise?
Time-wise, they're going to examine the rest of the corridor in this process, especially I think in the visioning session that they're going to have with the community, so you can sit around at the table and say, I'd like to see this here at 136. Let's make sure we have a buffer here. Let's not go any taller than 4 stories here. That's all going to be a part of the process. Today, they're just focusing on these areas.
No,
because there's been so much conversation.
I'm not questioning. What I'm saying is that in scheme of things, if you do the things in piecemeal fashion, our city is going to fail down the road.
Yeah.
So the main characteristic has to be overall scheme that has to go in.
He's gonna, so I expect that that's to the next slide.
Conversations about incentives
Yeah.
to kind of promote this type, that's another conversation.
Well,
that we
this
need
depends on
to
the
discuss.
developer. The developer will decide which way he's going to go, because I don't think that the city is going to finance all of this.
Yeah. So next slide. Again, just the property, the ownership, again, north is to the right of the page. There's multiple owners in here that says, but this is primarily all commercial, no residential. So there's the opportunity to acquire, if a developer to come here and acquire all this land to do a really impactful development. So what would that look like? So in this scheme right here, again, we are overall achieving the 1.0 FAR. We have 676 multifamily units, 14 townhomes, 23 units per the acre, 220,000 office space, 181,000 commercial, and a little over 1,200 parking spaces that are both structure and surface. Again, there's the opportunity here, if you were to consolidate this, to really create a town center. Obviously, you have the falls over here, which kind of serves as this, but this could take on a entirely different character. And so one of the questions that we started to ask ourselves, if this could be the heart, could be that downtown, if you will, is it better to front off of US 1, or would it be better to front off of 136? So the second plan you'll have that we'll show you shows you that. So this one,
Oh, sorry.
go ahead. So this one has its focus off of US 1, create that gateway off of US 1 where you come into this rather decent sized community space that has retail and even residential fronting on that. We also are providing a new main street here coming off 136, so it's easy to get north-south through here. Again, you have multifamily, mixed use, in these two blocks with multifamily and townhomes on the back. We also are introducing another sort of neighborhood street that goes north-south. Again, just trying to promote more access. Also, having a generous buffer and trying to be really mindful of how we're interacting with the adjacent residential, right? Trying to step down as best as possible. So in block 2, which is basically this right here, we range between 3 to 4 stories with the highest at Pinecrest and stepping down to the lowest, right? And again, we have mixed use, structured parking, surface parking, a lot of new neighborhood streets that will also have parking on them, but also have opportunities for other spaces to occur. On the north half, we introduced some office development, so that's block 1, 4 to 5 stories. That steps up a little bit because of the amount of space that we have. And so that's roughly 218,000 square feet of office, 285 parking spaces, again, shared between structured and surface. So again, we're trying to create a mix in this development and trying to create that live, work, play environment because of the influence of the transit center located at the intersection. The second scheme, like I was saying, takes a different approach. It comes off, your gateway is here off of 136. We think that would be potentially better for the community to come and enter into it instead of having to go off on US 1 to get into them. So you have this grand boulevard. The scale of this is actually comparable to Meisner Park, just to kind of put that in context for you. So it's a statement, it's a great public space, there's a lot of greenery there, a lot of opportunity for a lot of frontage on that, for that space. Again, there'd be on-street parking located into there. We also would terminate that into a plaza or another green space that would then also connect up to the office. So again, really trying to promote that connectivity north-south, but also east-west as well. The mixed-use development also have opportunities for green space. Also, we have our buffer there. The residential, which is multifamily and townhomes, could also have maybe a neighborhood park associated with that. So it feels like more like theirs instead of this being more the community. And again, 3 to 5 stories here. So this is a little bit taller than the last one. Again, 5 stories would be out here along Pinecrest Parkway, and we'd step down to the lower levels here. Their office is still at the top, but here in this scheme, we're only at 3 stories instead of the 4 to 5 that was in the previous one. Again, just playing around with different scenarios as far as density and height and the like.
All of the setbacks are current setbacks.
We haven't changed any of
No, no changes.
No change.
So that's a given in all the plans that you show.
It's a given in all of those.
Right.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
and this, and the green, and here, I asked you a question earlier. The percentage of green space that you're showing here is the same as in the other illustration, or is it grown in this one?
I don't have the exact number, but I would say that it's probably comparable. However, in scheme 2, we try to push it a little bit more to get more green space to kind of create that differentiation. See if we can get
So
more.
this is green, this is concept 1.
This is concept 1. Concept 2 obviously has a lot more green, more sort of block or neighborhood green opportunities.
And
Again,
in both cases, you're like a wedding take effect on the residential side as you're moving towards US 1.
high to low.
So if I were to ask you, if you're going to show me where the quarter mile is that comes off of the corridor, where does that fall into
So-
this?
I think it's the southeast corner of that property, pretty much.
It is, but again, I think we need to overlay the urban community zone as it associates to that.
Okay.
Right? So the mix of FAR, how we step down, could vary block by block. So that quarter mile, and we need to double check this, but I'm pretty sure there's a different sort of requirement that we need to follow here as opposed to the other two.
Yeah, the quarter mile, I think it's approximately a quarter mile, if I'm not mistaken, to here. But all the residential is excluded from the RTZ ordinance.
And that green strip that you have along that vertical line, that's just not grass, that's oaks and landscape and so forth, or?
So that could be primarily a buffer that's heavily planted to screen as much of this development as possible. There's plenty of room in there to put trails, multi-purpose trails, to promote connectivity so people can run and walk and bike through there as well. So there's a lot of opportunity with that. So but that is.
That should be developed because just putting just only green will not cut it, because
So the
you
distance,
need some trails and you need some pathways and walkways so people can engage. We've got 28,000 people living here, so that could be a great opportunity for them, to use it. Sorry.
I was just gonna add, so just to give us a little scale, this is a diagram, that green bar that goes all the way up, what is that, a mile, half a mile? If a quarter mile is where you pointed at, that path, that green going all the way up.
I would say you're probably slightly over half an hour.
I do have an aerial
It goes from
photograph.
136 to Sunnyland Park.
Yeah. So you can see the ball diamond, the skin right at the top. So you T right into.
I just want to make sure that I could walk that I wouldn't get too tired.
It's still a lot.
So just to confirm, I have an aerial photograph that shows the area. The quarter mile pretty much parallels US 1, obviously, and it goes like that. But all of this is excluded, so this is included, and all the other commercial is included.
So once again, what road exactly is the far right green, for example, give me a ballpark, what's the name of the road or the alley? Huh? No,
It would be the back of the Home Depot right now. It's the back of the Home Depot.
Yeah, the back of
Home Depot's right
What
here.
number is that?
It's not a street lot,
Oh.
it's the back of them.
It's the alleyway behind the Home Depot.
Right now, that space is primarily service for all the big box that's happening there.
No, but I want.
I think it's Southwest 84th Avenue, no? 84th
No.
Avenue.
I don't think it has a thing. I think it's just.
There's no road. There's no road. I'm sorry, what's your
Yeah, no, but it's just service.
I live right there. Yeah, it's close to 84, but it's not 84.
Actually, if you go 2 steps before, you had the Home Depot there and the house
Yeah,
and everything.
But I think the main point
City there,
is,
is that same thing.
So there's no street here today.
I know, but,
Access to the Home Depot.
Yes.
They're actually,
I can't hear it.
They're adding, they're behind, they're the loading docks for all of
Yeah, like, it's all like,
Yeah, it's all service. It's all back to us.
like a celebration.
Yeah.
But I think that's really important to have a secondary pedestrian thoroughfare separating, because we have opportunity along Evelyn Greer Park. We have opportunity along Sunnyland Park to introduce a pedestrian way. So we do have that opportunity in some areas that the city has control over to continue that.
I would even add that it should be wider so that people can use it. It should not be like Mickey Mouse, little halfway.
So what I read in that is that there's the green buffer, and then there's a small street that goes alongside, is that?
So this is 20 feet wide. So this is comparable. So you have another 20 feet on the backside here. So that's pretty sizable. This street is sized to have two-way traffic and on-street parking. So there's opportunity here to, if you don't want to have on-street parking, you can make a multi-use path on one side and parking on the other. So there's a lot of flexibility built into that to create the connectivity that we want, or to enhance the buffer, or to create essentially a linear park that would connect you from 136 up to the
I
park.
think the linear park would be very nice. The public can use it.
I think there has to be enough movement to where there's some security, because if it's dead space, then it becomes dangerous.
On the second floor, facing US one, what is what you have inside the building? You have like a courtyard?
Are you talking about this block right here?
No, from 136 of the facing US one, the second, that block. What do you have inside that block? In between the.
Is it a courtyard?
Is that a
This,
courtyard?
this is shown as surface parking, and we've had actually a lot of conversations about that. The other thing that you could do is put a structure on there so you have an amenitized deck over top of that for the.
No, definitely, you don't have parking there.
Well,
It's a public parking lot right now.
No, I know, but I think that it would be better to have amenity, pedestrian amenity,
yeah, and I think that's a good, I appreciate that question because, you know, conversations about subsurface garage, right? You know, do you want to, could you do that? Or do you do structure parking where everything's above? I think, you know, subsurface parking in this location, I think, is somewhat problematic and also maybe a deterrent from developers because it's so costly for the amount of space that you could be renting. So I think there's a conversation that could be had about how would we incentivize that, to promote that type of development so that this is given over to amenity space.
Right, yeah.
So,
I'm just going to second what Fred was saying, that based on your scheme, that space becomes some kind of communal courtyard space that we would want to incentivize the below-grade parking for that.
Yeah.
That to happen, no?
No, I would agree, and that's exactly the type of feedback that we would like to get from you all about, all right, well, what would be the priorities here?
I like number 2 very much, that concept with that boulevard, like nice North Park with, you know, commercial and residential, that's very nice. Continue, please, continue.
Can I just, I don't want to interrupt you, do you have some concluding remarks, or is there anything else that?
Well, now we're opening up for conversation,
Okay.
but I think what we wanted to share through these exhibits, and we can talk more detail about the boards over here if we wanted to, and answer questions, but I think the takeaway from us is, because the original question is, what does it take to get from 7.3 to 1? Our response is, it's not much, and it's not as impactful, I think, as perhaps the perception was before. We can get there with some modest changes and still have very quality, high-end types of development that's responsive to the context, right? I still think there's a lot of detail that we need to flesh out, see if there's any other priorities as far as, again, incentivizing to do subsurface parking to have more amenity space. That's a nice conversation. I think that's something we want to have. So at the end of the day, this is achievable. And I don't think it's going to create too much conflict. In fact, there's opportunities to really improve a lot of perhaps some of the issues that exist today with some of the approaches that we're showing. So
let me ask you a question. It's achievable, but let me ask you from a practical standpoint. Why would an owner of Home Depot want to get rid of that and put townhouses instead? I mean, explain the practical aspect of that. I just don't get it, but it's beautiful. I mean, it's a great picture. Oh, sure, we'd love to have Meisner Park here in Pinecrest, but you know what? I mean, we also need a Home Depot. We also need a few other things.
That's a fair question.
And who's going to do it? If it's not going to be the property owner, would a developer come in and buy it and demolish the Home Depot and then put townhouses instead?
Yeah, so
Let me just do something now, because I want to make sure you concluded your presentation.
Yeah.
There's a moment, everybody breathe, and it's, right now, it's about 7:30.
Okay.
So what I'd like to do before sort of opening it up to the board, right, or whatever we call it. Committee, forgive me. So I'd like to spend maybe 45 minutes to open up to our neighbors, and then you could just, you know, talk about what you think, as well as what they think, and how we can bring that together. And then maybe we could spend another little while us sort of addressing what we think.
So right now it's open to us.
Yeah, no, I want to open it up to the community first.
Okay, great.
And then we can probably go last. So,
I would like to finish with this.
all right, so if that's okay,
We're done. You can open it up.
All right, now I invite everybody to come up to the center mic. If anyone has something to sort of direct to Matt and talk about the presentation and the things.
Well, I want to answer the gentleman's question real quick. It's a
No,
good
this is
question.
it.
In fact,
Fine,
it's one
we'll
that
finish the
complicated.
presentation.
You know, again, there's multiple owners that own these parcels right now, right? And we had a lot of conversation about that, specifically about the Home Depot. From what we can tell, this is a very successful one. And so one of the questions we asked ourselves is like, why would you tear that down? Does that make sense? Or if they do tear it down, because they do have different sizes of Home Depot that fit in a more urban context, a lot of people obviously do that. Would that be an opportunity to still maintain that Home Depot but have other uses in here? Obviously, we didn't take that approach in this one, but if that was something that would happen, it would affect the layout of this plan. You would have a different design at the end of the day. Again, we were trying to look at a scenario that could encompass possibly all scenarios to kind of tease out these different outcomes that we're looking for. We could design this many, many different ways with different variables, but for this exercise right now, we felt it was important to say, all right, clean slate. What would you do if there's a clean slate? What would those opportunities be? And how would those opportunities then could be reinforced with changes to the code? That was it.
Can I ask a question, please? And I think this is maybe a little bit outside of this, but you know, as a resident and as an architect, I'm not a planner or a landscape architect, but these are all scenarios that encompass the three nodes that you focused on, as you were asked. Control of all of it, all the property, to make something like that ever happen. So the reality, and I think what somebody was saying, the reality of that's probably never going to happen in our lifetime unless someone, either the city bought it all and developed it as one big development. But I think as part of the charge that we were given in this committee was, how do you make Pinecrest look or identifiable or make it look different than somewhere else, etc. And there seems to be no discussion, unless there was happened last time when I wasn't here. But the only thing that ties all this together is US 1, this whole commercial strip. And even if you develop these nodes that you have focused on in the way, in one of the scenarios, concept 1, 2, 3, 4 for each one of them, none of it to me still seems cohesive enough to say that's Pinecrest. So have you thought, as you look at this, have you thought about anything that maybe ties all of this together from 136th Street to 80th Street, like the median of US 1? Maybe there's a thought about planting all pines along the median to define from 80th Street to 136th Street, Pinecrest. Because there are also other things that come to mind, like at every light, at every intersection, maybe there's a thing or a signage or an entry or a gateway that you can span across every place where there's a light, traffic light that goes into Pinecrest, and say, this is an entry gate, this is an entry gate, this is an entry gate.
Giant obelisk.
From the beginning, from 80th Street to 136th Street. Because I'm trying to find the one thing that might identify this community, and I haven't seen it yet, because you know, you focused on all these things, but for example, I would have focused as the center, the Meisner Park idea, I would do it in Sunnyland, which is more in the center of town versus here. I mean, obviously you have more land here in this piece, and I don't disagree with making this a little more dense, but what is there, or can you look at, maybe the next question might be, or something that says Pinecrest? Because the city of Pinecrest is not a real, you know, it's not old, it's not, doesn't have a lot of history, it's a very modern invention, if you will.
of pieces of Sunnyland and other parks along the edge. And it's sort of a, and I've said this before, and I don't mean it in a negative way, but it's a sort of a made-up city. It doesn't have a core, doesn't have a city, the center, or anything. It didn't grow like other places. And
The study's not limited to those nodes there.
I understand.
You're exactly right. We're going to get into the rest of that and talk about ways in which we can tie it together, architecture and medians and things like that. That's all part, I think, of this.
And my last comment about character of the city and style, you know, I as an architect, I do what I do, and I will say it, I'm a very modern designer. But what I think we need to say, because Pinecrest is not Key West, it's not Coral Gables, it's not any of that stuff. What I think needs to be said is that we should demand great architecture in whatever style. It should not be a one, it should be all styles. But with a control, and maybe the city, and I'm maybe suggesting that there might be an architectural review committee started, to demand good architecture, great architecture, not just mediocre or not just something that looks like someplace else.
I think it's not architecture, but it's also the city. See, we're talking about an urban core. We're talking about such a great area from 136 to 88. So style is not the only thing. I think, to be fair with Matt, you were trying to get to that. You know, when you were talking about the urban zone, I think we have opportunities where we can develop. I think we were talking about Gateway, and the gentleman over there had a right question. Hey, if you're going to get rid of the Home Depot, what's going to happen there? We want to see that before we make that kind of decision.
We need to be, you know, we can do things that identify Pinecrest in the public spaces.
Yes.
Not depend, because all of these ideas and all these nodes depend on 100% cooperation by private sector. Unless you control these sites, these are beautiful ideas, and like you said, there's 100 of them, okay? But we'll never see that in reality. So let's deal with the things that we can control.
I'll add, so the things that I agree with Ron is that by virtue of being an architect and do what I do, I don't think that you should necessarily dictate style. Modern or what have you, that if it's great architecture, it's going to work. So I agree with him on that. I think that the charge, and one of the things that going from macro to micro, all right, macro to micro, is that that when we started this exercise at the Banyan Bowl, and we worked our way to this moment, I could see and hear progress in that we kind of understand that we can do most of everything we want to do at the scale of 4 stories. That if we want to, we could increase this with incentives, maybe another couple of floors, 5 or 6 floors, and provide incentives there. We can continue by all of the graphics, and everybody can see, there's no one here, everyone can see that landscape and greenery is huge, and that you've incorporated it into your schemes. And that there's opportunities. There are opportunities to take, and we have to decide. You know, I remember when we were talking about the Home Depot, I love doing that Home Depot because I'm in and out and I get what I want and I'm just excited. But is that more important to our city than a center or a core where we can come together as a community? And I know where I stand on that. I kind of like them more.
We all stand with Home Depot.
I stand, you may not have understood me very well, I'll be very clear. The idea of a center of a city, okay, kind of where you're going with that, I agree with. I also agree with Ronnie in that great boulevards and great avenues are interconnected and linked to the other side. And I think that you're going to get to that at some point. I think that falls somewhere at crosswalks, roads, you know, intersections, that kind of stuff, those secondary. But I do like the fact that you're kind of pushing the limit well, we kind of got here from the standpoint of how tall do we want our buildings to be, right? And we're getting at that place where 6 stories seems to be getting close to an answer, and 4 stories, 3 stories, and well, maybe 8, with incentives of underground parking. Okay, maybe with underground parking and things of that nature that we could. So I think that you're getting closer to where we need. The only thing I didn't see in your presentation, which I would have liked to have seen, all right, is these diagrams with, well, you know, what changes if the FAR would have been the old FAR, the .73, you know, how many less parking spaces or more parking spaces? Some of the comparison that goes with that.
A matrix that compares.
Right, that compares these 2 schemes.
Yeah.
Because I like the delta, we're talking .27.
Right.
All right, so we only kind of know the extreme right now, but what does it represent? What are we talking about in the number of cars?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. So what's the trade-off, right? How many more
Mr.
residential?
Chair, I request
Yeah.
the first order of business should be what the gentleman on the corner talked about, and I talked earlier, that we should have a concept statement about what this city is going to be, you know, not about the style, and then we can get into the scheme. And then we can get into the issue of Home Depot and what's going to happen to the traffic and all those things. But that's what public is concerned, and that's what we should be concerned too. So I think otherwise it's going to be very confusing. We'll keep on going back to the FAR, because we're not talking about the FAR. I think we should be talking about first whatever city is going to look like.
And I understand that you feel that way. I'm just going to just say that for a great deal of time, so for the first couple of meetings that we had, I'm just going to recap.
Okay, I missed that.
Okay? The first couple of meetings, and I think we have to recap.
Yes.
There was a public outcry, all right, that the FAR could have controlled the dwellings per acre from up to 150 dwellings
Yes.
per acre.
Mhm.
That got down to now, officially, we got to 30 per acre, which was a huge difference. Then we discussed these bigger topics of FAR, and we kind of got to a place where we kind of understand the intersection of one, which is, I agree that it looks like one's going to be pretty much a fairly good number to consider, but we could always table that and say, forget it, we don't want any change. We want to keep it the way it is.
Now, the county's ordinance went from, what was it, 36 units per acre and higher, and they left that density, went to intensity with a floor area ratio down and not dictating.
So we've been moving from the big ideas down to the smaller. Victoria.
Yes.
Okay. So I thank you. Your presentation and your schemes are very good. I like that in the US one that we get to shop on, we have all the afternoon sun. So in this moment, in the existing commercial corridors, we have the parking right away as soon as we enter, and then we have the shopping mall with all the sun in the front. In all your schemes, you've been very nice putting the landscape buffering the commercial or whatever. So you put that, which looks very good, and I think that is very good, and that should be something encouraged, and that helps. And going back to the style of how the city should look, you know, there's 2 things. I don't want everybody in the mass transport coming and saying, oh, there's Pinecrest, the rich people. I don't want them knowing. But I would like to think that when everybody drives through Pinecrest, they feel this wonderful canopy of trees. Like sort of how we get excited in Coral Gables when there's a lot of trees. That has other problems in Coral Gables. There are smaller lots. They have all these trees and the grass doesn't grow. They have all these other, problems relating to that. But we have big lots. We can have a nice canopy. And if in all your schemes, you were very good about that. having that green space. And if we, in your very good idea, if we make the median and give it more shade, that is wonderful because US 1 is a big mass of concrete. So it'll help everybody and it'll help the air and everybody if we have nicer gallery.
So can we get the audience to come up and speak? I think the lady.
I just wanted to respond to what Victoria said. So, just a comment that you made about the parkway, the median, and the trees. That is something that was in the original vision plan. It wasn't implemented. So when you talk about those things, it's almost like a phase 2 of working with the agencies. So working with FDOT to understand the limitations and what they can and can't do. And in terms of, I mean, you know this because you're a landscape architect. So that's kind of like the next phase of the implementation, and that's really important because when we talk about the streets and streetscapes, anything that the city owns, right? Most of all the streets in Pinecrest are owned by the village of Pinecrest. So you can do whatever you want with the approval of the county and certain things if you're changing the traffic patterns. US 1 is different. But I believe the FDOT and people there now are fairly open to doing things that are pedestrian friendly, especially in relation to the corridor, to the BRT South corridor. So think about that and think about when we do our vision plan update, what are the implementation steps? Like what are the next things that we want to do as a community to get these things implemented that may be outside of our purview. And so it's important to start engaging those agency stakeholders early on so that we don't present them something that's not possible. But we've had success recently in other communities working with DOT and the county.
So, Palmetto Bay, the south, has been working on the median all the way down to US 1. There's no reason why we couldn't do that. But my point is, let's do things where we, or the city, or whatever, has control of the property. A lot of these things are things that may look very nice in a plan, in a book, whatever, but we'll never see it because of the way ownership happens. So why don't we focus on the things that we control? Maybe Pinecrest doesn't own to the center line. Maybe, I don't know what the actual legal part of it is.
They own the median, right?
But if you have to deal with FDOT, you deal with FDOT.
I'd like to respond to that real quick. With regard to private property, you're absolutely right, we don't control it. But as planning director, I meet on a regular basis with property owners every day, multiple times a day for the last 12 years. And I've met with all the major property owners, and some, for example, Macy's, they're not probably interested in redeveloping anytime soon, unfortunately. We had a meeting with the mayor and the head of FDOT District 6 and the village manager and the like, and we're talking about different things, and I don't think they're interested. But Pinecrest Shops, Baptist, Pinecrest Town Center to the south of us, I've seen plans from an architect for some improvements to that shopping center. Captain's Tavern is owned by multiple people, but there's a strong interest in redeveloping that entire center. It's just a matter of assembling those properties and getting them under one ownership. And I'm confident that's going to happen. Sunnyland, they're interested in renovating that and maybe adding where the drugstore is. They're going to maybe go multiple stories there, not multiple, but 2 or 3 stories perhaps. Home Depot, the Specters, I've met with them. I've seen different plans that include residential and office and commercial. And I believe they want to keep the Home Depot because it is very profitable. But the Specters ultimately, I believe, do want to redevelop that property. And then Dixie Bell Shops, of course, is another example of redevelopment that occurred several years ago. Henry Stu owns that property. Working with John Adams, they made major changes to that shopping center and are able now to attract national tenants. So we don't know when it's going to be redeveloped. All we're asking to do is put in a plan in place and allow allow, with incentives, to allow for quality redevelopment, quality architecture, and require that as the property redevelops in the future. But other than that, all your points that you're making with regard to the medians, the public spaces and things like that, excellent points, and that all hopefully is going to be included in your US 1 plan update.
Because I think since, and I agree with you, there may be very much some of these things get developed and there's a plan and all of the rules are established. But it could be that if the city, and again, these are just ideas that I'm throwing out there, doesn't mean that happens, but if you had a sort of a gateway design or something, or different ones for different east-west coming in from US 1 into Pinecrest community, that could actually, and if you improve the landscaping along US 1, and again, I say, let's get rid of all the trees that are there now and make everything pines. As an idea, from one end to the other, okay, in the median. You might start then, if the city starts doing these kind of things, you might get other private owners motivated to say, maybe, this is kind of an interesting looking thing, maybe I want to develop my property, etc. And it could be that the city then sort of jumpstarts the idea of wanting to redevelop in the new concept.
May I just, I know that you've been waiting, ma'am. Would you take the floor and
Yeah.
maybe you could...
My name's Laura McNaughton. So I noticed one thing in one of your concepts, which I think is the one on 104th, you had a 3B, and I don't see a 3B here, unless I'm mistaken. Is there a 3B? I saw a slide of 3B, and the reason that caught my attention is because, oh, okay, good. On that one, you were mentioning that it's up to 6 stories.
Correct.
So I kind of it caught my ear, okay, well, I don't see it here to actually take a picture.
I'm not hiding anything.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I didn't see it, so I didn't know if that was an afterthought because I didn't see that one there. Because it caught my attention when you said 6 stories. The other thing about this particular section, and the reason this pops out for me is because I live near here. And I know this area very well, and I've lived here a long time, so I understand the concept of the future vision. But one of the biggest problems that we have as a community is feeling the trust and having the faith as to what is being designed and presented and what actually could be, right?
Yeah.
So we've heard a lot of public comment over the last year that under no circumstances is there any discussion for Home Depot to be removed or is leaving. So now when we have a presentation that completely eliminates it, it makes the public feel a little bit more distrust, in what is actually being presented. So we know we can't force developers to do this. We can change the code. We can incentivize with, credits or whatever. But if we draw something, it makes the public feel like, hey guys, we're going to change the zoning to accomplish this, right? So what does that mean? Are developers waiting for all this and then you're going to do it? But the Home Depot's not going away, so then people don't believe it. Does that make sense?
It does, and again, I want to stress that we're not proposing to remove Home Depot. We are just looking at one of many scenarios of how this development, or how these parcels, if consolidated, could be developed.
To reach 1.0.
To meet that threshold. We're going to advance these. So as we advance these, we could put Home Depot back in there because of the realities behind it, and see what that does to this development down here. Those are the comments that we would like to have, so we can continue to flush out what's possible, what needs to change.
Couldn't that commercial be Home Depot?
Well, may I make my last point so that you can continue with, because I know your time is valuable. So I agree with that, but again, the pulse of the community is critical, right? Because right now, this community is very upset, so much upset that they are looking to go to referendum to change future zoning to be voted on by the people. So I think if we really want to sell improvements and show improvements to our community, I think that your instructions for this commission should have been to include both case scenarios, like you're just offering now. Because to go back to the table and to the drawing board is a little bit of a waste of time for you guys.
So it makes the community feel that they can't trust what's going on, because that really should have been commissioned to you guys and really, discussed so that you could offer both. This is what happens now if only the Home Depot property sells, because that's 26 acres. You probably could design something fabulous just on the 26 acres. I know you could.
Yes, we probably
Yeah,
could.
Of course.
But nobody owns that, only the Spectre, so
That's 26 acres.
They can do whatever they want.
That's not true. They cannot do whatever they want,
No,
because
no,
right
no,
now
no,
it's
no,
only
no,
zoned
no,
for
no,
commercial.
I grew up in this area too.
Right.
I've lived here 58 years, all my life, and I did grow up here. I think I think the takeaway from this for me is the idea that we can introduce a pedestrian way, like along the Sunnyland Park. There's that one parking lot. You can actually introduce a secondary way that people can, instead of going on US 1, can walk on the backside of all these commercial developments and
But
have a nice
but with
run.
all due respect, that would not require you to change the zoning to add
Right,
residential.
but what we're trying to do is we're trying to show that all this can come together. So as each individual owner develops, they can take that piece of the puzzle and plug it in.
I understand what you're trying to do. I'm trying to tell you the pulse of the community. You're going to create more distrust by presenting only this as the scenario for these parcels of land. That's what I'm sharing with you. I know what you're trying to do. I'm not agreeing or disagreeing. I'm sharing that you're going to create a larger distrust in the community, because what you're presenting is the complete opposite of what our mayor has said will absolutely not happen.
Again,
So just food for thought, that's all.
This isn't intended to be a plan that anyone must follow. It's just
I
meant to
understand that, Mr.
stimulate
Olmsted.
discussion.
I understand that, Mr.
Proceed.
Olmsted, but this is going to be presented as recommendations to the
So basically, what
council.
you wanted to have an alternative with the Home Depot, right? Is that what you would like?
If you would like to maintain trust with the community, I suggest that you do something similar to
But
that.
we don't have a lot of Home Depots if it goes to that again. I mean,
Well,
it's just a store.
All right, guys, let me do. Excuse me, guys. Guys, just a moment. I think this gentleman was waiting.
Go ahead, man, go ahead.
Okay, why don't you come up then, man? All right.
And she knows about trees.
All right, hi, I'm Karen Ross. I have a couple comments. I had a great bit of involvement with the committee 10 years ago. And first of all, I think redoing vision plans every 10 years is stupid. I don't know, we've heard things have changed. Well, no, Pinecrest hasn't changed in 10 years. The busway, the RTZ, the county wants to change things. Pinecrest isn't changing. So the vision plan, and I think I would say we did focus on things that were doable. A lot of it had to do with landscaping. A lot more minor things than is being shown here, because I think the conclusion was all the various owners, this isn't going to happen. But now that I mentioned the other visioning, there is US 1 has been recently replanted, re-landscaped. I don't know if they finished the plan, but the council voted not to put in sprinklers. They figured let it be more natural. So maybe there's a limit to what can be put in there on the median. But they are also, I know the village is putting in more pine trees. They're struggling, but they are putting in more pine trees to get more of a look. I would like to just quickly address the idea of the wedding cake scenario where you step your buildings back. I think you also need to look at stepping them back from US 1 to have a nice look. US 1 is our front driveway. You know, we drive by there 3 times a day, if not more. We need to see buildings that are stepped back, not a 6-story building, and I would also say I think 4 better be the max that people look at, unless you're stepping something back to the middle where that higher part of the wedding cake, from any side you look at it, the high part is going to be toward the back. So I don't see that that was thought out along on this plan. I'm not in favor of parking garages. I like the surface parking. If I just need to run into the dry cleaners, want to just pull up real quick in front of the store. Go to the post office, pull up real quick in front of the store. Stop at CVS. Stop and see the veterinarian. I mean, it's in and out, in and out, in and out. I don't want to drive up and down the parking garage structure. We are a semi-rural community. By our charter, we're designated as a semi-rural community. Something relating to Meisner Park just does not sound like semi-rural to me. I'm not sure some of the pictures we saw as possible style seems like semi-rural to me. We have open spaces. I did want to ask the consultants, do you know anything about Gary Matzner Park?
I do.
Do you know where it is?
I'm working on it.
You what?
The Boca Raton one?
Then we really don't need, I'll say, wasted green space at that CVS block where you're talking about a park area there. Less than 2 blocks away, there's going to be a whole park for the residents, any residents, but especially those in the apartment areas there. And mixed use. For 25 years, we've had that North Pinecrest Business Alternative or District that allowed mixed use. In 25 years, no one's wanted to do that. So I don't see why that's such an important part of what's being designed, and the increased housing units. I'm not sure that Pinecrest wants to invite a lot more residents to move in newly created apartments or townhouses. It's going to stress our schools, it's going to be more traffic. You know, we run really well, right as we are right now at our population. So knowing that we don't need to meet those criteria for the county, I would be very happy, and I think probably a whole lot of people, if we just didn't increase the, go much with the mixed use idea. Right, that's my say.
Thank you.
No, go. I will let you.
I have one question. He's been standing back there,
So, hi, Paul Rolata. I've been in Pinecrest, 55 years. So, the first question on this slide right here, when I look at it, I like the idea. I'm for getting rid of. The first question is that green line along US 1. Is there no way to back up the buildings against that and kind of get rid of? So the idea is, if you want to change Pinecrest to look like Pinecrest, there's more people in South Florida than ever, and people are using US 1, to get from Homestead to downtown. They want you to take the busway. Great, a lot of people aren't going to take it, but they're going to use US 1 to get to the Grove, get to Coral Gables. And for the traffic right now is horrendous on US 1. And so the idea was, if you want to change Pinecrest, look at maybe stopping the entry or the pausing, getting into these commercial areas. Push it on the other side. Have gateways, certain streets are gateways that come in, and then you have a corridor between residential and commercial. Make it a nice big buffer, but where you can pull in right up to your dry cleaning and go in there. So along US 1, it's really like a wall, where you can. You say, well, we're in Pinecrest right now. If you want to go to the restaurant, you're going to go into the gateway and you're going to come around, and it's going to be beautiful open spaces, because US 1 is horrible. So when we first started this, back when our mayor got up and said, look, we're going to increase density, we're going to increase drivers, parking.
story, and the whole community went, "Were you nuts? Have you been out on a 7 a.m. on a Monday morning in Pinecrest with the traffic?" And with the pandemic, people aren't really driving. So can you imagine when we go back to full scale, it's going to be crazy. So that's what happened. So on 104th, even I look at this picture here. Where, I mean, are you going to expand the roadway to accommodate now another 2 lanes to get into this area on 136th?
We're not proposing any transportation because, again, that's not part of our charges as far as doing traffic analysis.
Exactly, and I'm not holding it against you, but that was something that was brought up day one at the first meetings, which was, look, we hear all day long 1.0 FAR and 6 stories, and all we can say is about people on 100th Street, or whatever it is that goes on to the Palmetto. It's insane right now. Go on any day and try it in the morning, just sit there.
Well, the one thing that I would add about the transportation system, that's why in all of these schemes that you see in there, we suggested the introduction of secondary streets or more neighborhood streets, right? And that is to take a lot of the pressure that's currently happening on 136 and other streets so that the level of service isn't impacted. Our thoughts at the end of the day that with whatever happens here, of course, regardless, if a developer was able to purchase and do this whole thing, they're going to have to do a traffic analysis to get that to the city to be approved, right? If Home Depot or this half right here was going to be developed, they need to do the exact same thing. And our thinking, even with some of the precedent imagery we had before with the parking garage, more connectivity, street typologies, we're mindful of how people are getting to here so we don't have an impact on the level of service as it exists today. We're mindful of that. But again, our focus is a little more focused. We're not doing a full-blown traffic study. I can't tell you what the trip counts are. I can't tell you what the peak times are. That's not part of this exercise.
So let me ask the question you're bringing up, or the suggestion you're making, right, that I'm picking up from it, is that there would be an access road that would be for the short-term driver coming in off of the primary. And so the question to you, Matt, I want to make the question to you. So if I took that diagram that you do, which is diagrammatic, it's schematic, you're not proposing it, and for argument's sake, you keep the parts you like. The Home Depot stays in the corner. Right. You dress it up. It looks like part of the complex, right? And you slid the buildings back where you had a secondary aisle that could allow cars to come in and out from an intersection. Do you think that that's manageable? Is that something that this type of scheme could do?
It's obviously another scenario. It's something that we could analyze. If Home Depot comes in here, that's going to have an impact. As far as the queuing, that's the big concern is queuing, cars stacking up, make sure that you have.
Well, that's what I hear you say.
So when we look at these, the size of our blocks are sized purposely to help alleviate some of those congestion issues, so that when you pull into the property, you have plenty of, you're not going to slam right into somebody that's stopping a stop sign, right, or confusing where they're going. So the block sizes that we show here are best practices for people to come into the site to be able to get oriented. The other idea too, as far as like parking and short-term parking, there's many strategies that we can do. Again, all of these streets that we're showing here has on-street parking. Some of those can be metered, some of those can be signed for short-term parking. So if you need to hop into a store for 15 minutes, it's signed for 15-minute parking. You park there, you hop into your store, you're on your way. You don't have to go into the parking garage.
And how far?
Many different strategies we can do to help alleviate the transportation.
How far forward can you push buildings? So I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying put all the buildings as close to US 1, if not on US 1. Have maybe only exit parts, right?
Yeah, so we're following the offset currently on US 1, which is a 20-foot offset from US 1 from the right of way. That's what this green patch.
And you have to have it. We can't say.
Yes. Yes.
That's already existing.
That's existing.
That's existing.
And there, inside that is an 8-foot landscape buffer as well. So in that 20 acres of buffer.
Existing as well.
Which is awesome.
Today.
And we're not changing that. In fact, I was hoping my president manager would speak to how we would bolster that and make it more of an amenity, but also help sort of diffuse some of the views out of US 1 as well.
Keep in
So-
mind, we called Pinecrest changed the name to Pinecrest Parkway. The Wetzel Parkway.
But that's okay here. And what about all the other commercial all the way down? They don't have 8 feet. I mean, look at the 104th, you have the gas stations. They don't have 8 feet. They don't have landscaping in there. They don't have that.
If that site was to be redeveloped, they would be required to follow that upgrade.
So, okay, well, I mean, it is what it is, I guess, right? The last question on, so there's no planning as far as the cars go. There's no planning as far as schools go, right? I mean, at this point, right, no one said, hey, we're gonna add so many more new residents, we don't know anything. Water, runoff, drain, we don't see anything. When does that come into play?
So Matt was referring to levels of service. Our comprehensive plan, their land development regulations have levels of service for water and sewer, solid waste, traffic, parks.
For this new upgrade of.
No, it's already in place. So any developer that comes in with a new development proposal, US 1 plan notwithstanding, has to demonstrate compliance with our levels of service. So if they can't meet the levels of service, they have to scale back the development or provide additional services so that they can meet those concurrency requirements.
So with all these new apartments in here, did you look, that's included for Palmetto High and Palmetto, what is it, the middle school and stuff?
There's school concurrency requirements. If somebody were to able to develop a development like that in Pinecrest, they would have to confer with Miami-Dade County Public Schools and indicate how many students that's going to generate. Then they're going to compare that to the capacity that's available, and they either increase capacity if they need to, or they don't develop.
You answered all my questions?
There we go. We got one last speaker. We'll round up the group.
A couple of things.
Two speakers.
Okay, another.
Two
speakers.
Three, okay.
Okay, so a couple of things, Mom. I disagree with you in everything, basically, and that's the purpose of this. But basically, I mean, there's plenty of examples of infield parking lots, in which like Home Depot can get redeveloped, and at the end, if Home Depot goes away and it crosses the US 1 to the other side, honestly, I wouldn't care driving 1 minute more. So we're doing a whole big thing about Home Depot and Publix, and nowadays, if I go to Home Depot and I want to go to Publix, I go to US 1 and then come back again, which slows down traffic and it's not efficient. You were mentioning like, I want to go with my car to USPS and then I want to go to Walgreens. And if you do something like this, you can park your car and you will have all the stores like next to each other. You can have mom and pop shops that nowadays nobody can pay the rent to be in Sunnyland to put a cookie shop, which if we have a real city, you will have that kind of opportunity. So my mom, for example, she lives here. She had to go to rent to Dayland because she couldn't afford, something here because there's no product for, a senior divorced woman that doesn't have an income more than, the retirement. So I think these kind of things, and cities don't change overnight. I mean, this is not going to happen tomorrow. This is not going to happen even in 10 years. Maybe we won't see this change, but we're trying to put the basis for something that is going to be built along the, couple of years. So I think I would rather have that, in my future vision. And if I get halfway, it's going to be better than what we have right now, which is a lot of parking lots, which nothing on them. And, and when you were talking about the stepping back of the buildings, I'm an architect too. So, the width of US 1 is the same as Champs-Élysées. And there's a reason why that street is beautiful. And it's not only because it's in the middle of Paris, it's because there's a ratio between the buildings and the width of the street. I guess you can explain that way better than me. But, when you go to a main street and you see something beautiful, it's because those 2 or 3 story buildings in a narrow street, they create this kind of coziness, and also trees help do that. So, US 1 will never be Champs-Élysées, we know that, right? But what I'm saying is it can be better, by adding trees, by, having the buildings the right size. So I think change is coming even if we want it or not. So what I'm trying to say is we should try to put out our best vision of this and then try to make it happen as much as we can. We can't control, if Home Depot is going to be staying there or not, but I'm pretty sure that eventually
as these condos in Miami Beach, they're buying them out and just to tear them down and do like a luxury tower, because now the economics on the land makes sense. Eventually that piece of land is going to be so expensive that maybe Home Depot is not going to be there anymore. Or, as he said, there are Targets, Home Depots in the middle of cities, which can still be viable. It's just a matter of, numbers at the end. So sorry, it's not against you. I'm just trying to point another vision. Okay?
Is Home Depot sale leaseback? Home Depot is owned by Home Depot or owned by somebody else?
Yeah, Home Depot is, the business is owned by Home Depot.
I know
The property that it's on is owned by the Spectre family.
I'm talking real estate.
We have one last gentleman, we have 2 more people. Would you come up, please?
It's a sale leaseback, boys.
Thank you.
Good evening. 3 points, I guess, just to make maybe in a more general sense, but in the interest of time, for the first one, I do agree with most of what you said, Ms. Ross, earlier. I'd like to kind of keep it and see it that way. Number one. Number two, the mayor has said before, I'm not speaking for him, he's not here, but what I've heard in other meetings is, we have the vision plan from 10, 12 years ago. It has not led to enough change. So what we want to do with this new vision plan, or updated vision plan, is to provide more incentives to lead to more change. And really, at the end of the day, what drives change is economics. And as has been said, how do we get people to change? Let them do more, let the economic payoff be greater and better, and change will come more and faster. So that's only done by allowing you to do more on this property. And not to pick on the Home Depot, to me doesn't matter, but if you allow the owner of that land, which is not Home Depot, to do something much more valuable than the lease that they have today with Home Depot, they're going to terminate that lease, or they're going to buy out that lease. They're either going to sell the land if it's gone from let's just say $1 million property to a $10 million property, or they're going to develop it themselves and get 3 or 4 or 10 times the rent that they have now. So by changing all this zoning, what we're doing is we're accelerating, we're motivating for more change, but we can only do it if we add significant value to that. And the only way you add significant value is by increasing density. So it all comes back to the main common denominator, which is we're trying to push an increase in density, which the vast majority of us residents do not want to see. And we're happy with the density we have now. And my last point was on the floor area ratio that we talked about earlier. But just to present it in a different way, because we talk about, it's just a 0.27 increase, and we're just adding 0.27 to the floor area ratio. But in reality, a lot of people think of it in percentages. So if the rule today, or if the limit today is 0.73, and we're looking at going to a maximum, and I get the difference between the minimum for the county and the maximum for Pinecrest. But if we're going to a maximum of 1.0, that's really a 37% increase in density, correct? So we're
0.27. 0.27. That's 0.73 to 100.
From 0.73 to 1.0 is a 37% increase in density. So I think the way to explain that to people so that they understand is that the village council will more than likely be looking to recommend a density increase along the US 1 corridor of 38% more density.
27.
Well,
Actually, it's 40%.
I think that's a little,
That's not
slightly confusing because you could go from 1.0 to 3 and then that would be 200%. So the limit is not 100%. So I understand what you're saying, but maybe we need to have better images to explain it.
Well, but to go from 0.73 to 1.0, you have to increase it by 38%. The existing density has to be increased by 38%.
In totality.
Yes.
Right, but it's
So
true,
what's the
but
point?
it's not.
What's the point?
Yeah,
The point is that we're increasing density by 38% over what it is today.
The square
Over what it
footage,
is
not
today.
necessarily the footprint of the buildings or things like that.
The footprint is a square footage.
No, because it can be in several levels.
All of these
It's the
renderings
square
show an
footage
increase
of
in
some of the
density.
floors.
Exactly,
Because our
but what I'm
current
saying
max is 25.
So that means that you'll end up with
37%.
what, a little extra square footage?
Yeah.
You can end up with 37% more
What does that mean?
space.
37% means what? If you have a 10,000 square foot building, how big is the building gonna be now?
37%.
Well, it depends on the nature, but in a nutshell, it's 37% bigger.
So what's 30% on a 10,000 square foot building?
3,700 square feet.
Is that gonna break the whole world apart for another 3,000 square feet? I mean,
Well, to me it will.
Put it into the reality.
That is the
How
reality,
important is that?
37%.
So how important is 3,000 square feet?
It's important. It's being presented that we're going from a very, a very minute increase. The fact is that we're going over 1/3
We're only
of an
talking
increase.
about just the commercial, and we're talking about a small amount of square footage. We're not gonna be building 1,000,000 square feet, for goodness sakes,
37% is a big percent jump.
on the commercial areas only.
Yes.
And we're not talking about a tremendous amount. Yes, there is an
Well,
increase.
And there's no residential units, so that's not the residential.
37% is, I'd love to get 37% increase in.
Sir,
Would you rather have 5?
Gentlemen, can you do me a favor? Do me a favor.
Just for the-
Because the point,
Those are my points.
and you're making a point. So I'm gonna ask you one question. So it's a simple one. It's not complicated. It doesn't include percentages or math. All right? So you're not in favor of increased density?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Yeah, that's what.
And my question and my recommendation to this group is, please present it in a way that people can understand it, which is,
And I think
we're talking about increasing density 38.
You made the point already. You made the point, and we heard it 3 or 4 different ways.
Great.
So you did a good job.
Thank you.
And I asked you that for the next time, right? The comparative analysis of what it is and what it could be. And not only the factor of a 40% factor or 37% factor, because what drives this, and I thought that your point was valid, the economic incentives to create great architecture has to be there, because if nothing will get done if it's not there. So I agree with you on that. In addition to that, great architecture costs money, and so there has to be incentives for it. And everyone loves great architecture. I agree with the speaker on your point about Paris and the grand boulevards. I would like to see a grand boulevard there. So we may not get it, but I'm going to try as hell to try to get it. So I think that we're all in favor of something like that. The question is, how do we see it? How do we plan something out that we can create a vision for the future people to follow? And so that I think is part of it, but I think I agree with him that you have to show that comparative analysis so that you could say, hey, you know what? 37% is here, but in parking it stays less or perhaps a little bit more. What is it? Right? So that's the part that was missing, I think, in your presentation that you'll bring next time, new business. There's one more person back here, no?
Thank you for saying it that way. And I'm all about aesthetics and the way it looks, and right now there's a lot of room for improvement on municipal corridors.
And I'm going to say that something that we didn't talk about, something that I thought you were going to talk about that you wanted to talk about, is some people eat food by eating as much of it as possible. Other people look at the food and they like to see it and they take pictures of it. I sense that maybe the group is kind of divided on do we want this great appearance of a city, or do we want to be able to enjoy the city? And I haven't really heard enough about that. But I think that there's a sense of some people really like to look at things and see how beautiful it is. They don't care if the space is that great. And some people really want to enjoy the space. So there is some of that we still didn't hash out in your presentation today.
That was a main point. I think that will help the public
That's your point.
to really understand what's really going on.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So I'm not an architect, but my question is, so this increase in commercial property is going to reduce my property taxes? The minimum? How does that work, right? Yes. I'm just saying, that would be an incentive for some of our homeowners.
The commercial
Because
does help to offset the residential.
in Coral Gables, which I've lived for many, many years before, I've been here for what, 12, 13 years, those property taxes were just so reasonable because of the commercial space that was being renovated. And so I'm just saying, I would tie that into the presentations here.
If you can offer that to,
You know,
to many of the residents of Pinecrest.
My cousin's husband is Gary Maxner, and he helped form Pinecrest.
Mhm.
The dividing line was 67 at one point, then it switched to 77, and then they realized they couldn't make the numbers work if they didn't get hold of the commercial. That's why they jumped to US 1, because they had to do it to offset the taxes.
Beautiful thing we think.
All right, I'd like to invite the board.
Okay. I've lived here 37 years, and I just want you to know that this community is very appealing to a great many people. People are moving here, they're building magnificent houses, they love this community, they like what they see, and so we don't have a problem. I think the way this thing should be handled, or should have been handled, is do we have a problem? Do we have something that we need to resolve? And what is that problem? We certainly don't have a problem in the residential area. People are just flocking. There's like an explosion of new development in this area. People want to be here, and the prices are zooming. It has nothing to do with some of the things that we're talking about. I'm familiar with the vision plan that was done 10 or 12 years ago, and I used that when I happened to have been fortunate. I worked with our zoning director on issues that came up. It's a good plan, it's a good vision plan, but it's so basic and simple, it works. What it does is it tries to keep things looking right. It addresses landscaping, it addresses the structure, the architecture, it addresses signs, because there was an issue that came up. Remember, Steve, there was a sign where an owner of a shopping center wanted to put multiple signs, as much as he possibly could, so he could take advantage of that. And we went to the vision plan and said, wait a minute, you know, this is becoming a little bit like Hialeah. We don't want to be Hialeah. Or some other. So we have a great vision plan. It's just really outstanding. All we need to do, in my opinion, is just tweak it a little bit. And the fact that we have to increase density, this isn't a thing that we should all be dying over. We're talking about a minor change, in my opinion. And it isn't something that is going to ruin Pinecrest, and I don't think the community will just drop dead over this issue. It's not that important, if you get my drift.
Yes.
So we have a good vision plan. We need to modify that vision plan. This is all wonderful. We have excellent people here today. 6 professionals on this side. We've got a consulting firm on this side. But it seems to me that this is overkill. It's not, I didn't order this to be done, but somebody did, and somebody forwarded the money to do all this work. You guys are doing a super job. I'm impressed. I think even to do this kind of a structure is magnificent, but it just doesn't seem to fit. We have a simple problem or no problem. We just want to make things as nice as possible and keep our community the way it is. That's it. Am I right?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, so I'd like to open it up to the board, and if not, we can adjourn. Ma'am?
Hi, I've been living here in Pinecrest all my life, 66 years, so I'm the new kid on the block as far as all this vision plans for the future of Pinecrest, but I totally disagree with a lot of what, I'm not an architect, I'm not a professional, and all these cosmetics, you know, the presentation of the buildings. All I know is from what I'm observing, and I've been in Pinecrest all my life, and I happen to be right there near Dayland. Everything right now, the discussion is about, for example, the depot. I'm more concerned about North Dayland. I have a question for you all. In other words, I'm new to this business. Is this eminent domain that you're talking about as far as Miami-Dade County having control of 1/4 of the, it's not eminent domain?
No, eminent domain is where somebody takes, where the public government takes private property for public purposes and compensates the private property owner.
Isn't that what Miami-Dade is doing that?
What's that?
Isn't that what Miami-Dade is doing that?
What? No.
Taking all the 1/4 sides of US 1, okay, advancing it in Pinecrest Park.
No, what Miami-Dade County is doing is saying they're taking control of land use to the extent, and I've heard them talk,
Okay, so is this going to look, I don't mean to interrupt, because I know everybody wants to go home, and drag this on. Are we gonna look like what the Gables looks like there now by Ponce de Leon, Merrick Place, all that, no setback, high-rise buildings and what's happening over there and that's, neck of the woods? Are we going to look like that? Because it's really disturbing that there's not gonna, the whole purpose of this vision plan is, for example, to ease the traffic and the smart plan, blah, blah, blah. But you're talking about these transit stations, these 3 different, locations. What is the transit station going to be? Metro or buses? What? Only buses. So where the heck are the buses going to fit? I don't know the traffic, realistically. So nobody's going to, maybe in 20 years from now, but what phase is going to be first? Dadeland or the depot? What's coming? Because I want to know, because I will be directly impacted. And, this is a small little committee here, but and very correctly, the gentleman that was here, did he leave?
Yes, Harry.
Harry, okay. He's saying that it's no big deal, the density, and it's not the big deal. What attracts people to Pinecrest is our space, our greenery. In this whole presentation, you have hardly ever mentioned environmental impact, how this is going, it's happening right in front of my house, practically there with Gulliver Prep. They're building now an SUP, thinking of building a shared use path, and my family and I are being direct. In other words, we're taking away all the greenery, all the grass, tearing down all the trees that have been there now for, in my yard, 50, 60, 70 years, and replace them with a little Mickey Mouse, margin there, little trees or whatever that's going to take. I don't understand what's going on. I see the vision in this. How soon do you project this redevelopment to happen? Because this high density will take away from our attraction. The whole big, beautiful, and like the other lady said, our tax base. How is that going to affect us?
Well,
I know that with the annexation of Miami Springs, Doral, it's just going to raise taxes. Huh?
This affecting the strip malls along US 1, not your particular house.
I don't know about that because of location.
Let me just clarify. So we put together talking points which answers a lot of your questions, and I think one of the
take that with you so you have
one of the downsides of doing these meetings is that we've done 4 and not everybody can attend, and so there's a gap in information and understanding.
Okay.
But the South Corridor Bus Rapid Transit is a plan on the existing corridor that's going to be developed.
Correct, but when do you expect this?
So that's under construction now. They're already starting.
Yeah, we've had discussions with the county specific to that question. So
The-
that's
the-
in that FAQ.
Right.
That's in that talking point, and it's also referenced on the
All this is
website.
having a direct impact on our traffic on US 1, okay? And all the side streets and the surrounding areas, especially us that live very close to useless 1, okay? So in other words, this is really impacting, with all this high density, I'm already seeing it spilling over there on North Kendall Drive there by my house, and Ludlam and everything, and more people and more traffic. So I think we're just encouraging in the wrong way all this overdevelopment, and then you're presenting it with the aesthetics.
So it's apparent that your concern is more density, and I think you made the point very strongly. And so since I need to get home and let my dog out, and that's my hidden agenda, I would like to just open it up to the board. Any questions, any comments? Thank you guys for trying to not ask during the process, but Pepe's been wanting to say something for a while. Would you just let him go?
Okay, mine is very short. I thank you so much for joining you today, and my main concern will be to make sure the citizen of Pinecrest, their point of view is taken no matter what we do. And I assure you from to the public, anything we're going to do is a Home Depot or not Home Depot, it'll be very well thought into it to make sure the benefits of our community. question. Thank you.
So you're gonna start with the Home Depot first?
Can you?
I'm sorry?
No, okay, I have several questions. One is, consider a plaza at the intersection of US 1 and 136th Street. When you come into Pinecrest, you see a plaza with maybe pine trees and all these things at the very beginning, at the corner. One of them, that is one of the comments. The other is the Home Depot might be integrated into a building, because I think that the Home Depot is too big and they need a lot of parking. So it cannot survive the way that it is. So I foresee like a mixed use, part of the mixed use, where you have parking and then you have the Home Depot, or you might have office or whatever. That is a consideration. The other, I would like to see a scheme with a higher density, maybe a 1.5, because what I can say is this: in order to, and I have been involved in planning for over 30 years, and I have been involved doing zoning, land uses, and incentives. And you need incentives beyond 1.0, because there are too many things that we want to accomplish, and I don't think that with 1.0 you can get this. Because whatever we are recommending is expensive. So if we want to have a quality architecture, open space and vegetation, all these things, you need more bonuses. Maybe we can start at 1.0, but we can increase maybe to 1.5, I don't know. But I would like to see a really one alternative with higher density.
Thank you.
I move that we adjourn.
No, wait, hold on a second. They want to have a visioning session, and Melissa indicated that it would be scheduled in the next 2 weeks, and I just have to tell you, before we schedule a community-wide visioning session and invite the public to that, we need to determine where it's going to be, when it's going to be, how long it's going to last, what day it's going to be. I've gotten a schedule for the availability of this room and the Evelyn Greer Park. This is not going to be available anymore in September. And we can't just say we're going to have a visiting session in 2 weeks without giving adequate notice to the public. So they want to schedule a visiting session, and in order to do that, we need your input in terms of dates are going to be available and dates, times, and place.
Melissa, can you so is this envisioning plan sort of like a charrette of some kind, or what is it exactly?
So we're in the process of designing that plan, but the idea is to show different views and plans that build off of what Matt's shown. We'd like to have, I mean, we've had a lot of interaction at these meetings, but we'd like to have more. And so we'd like to get the community input on the different concepts and on, you know, all of the, you know, the 8 different points that I showed at the beginning of the sort of the themes that we want to address. We want to have an interactive survey where people can, you know, scan the QR code on their phone and answer questions in real time so we can see the answers.
So it's not a public charrette, the one you're talking about.
And in a lot of ways it will. It actually will be completely invited to the public to participate. I wanted to reference a couple things. One of the ideas that we were circulating with on the vision session was to actually implement this original FAR as a, you know, design look to what we're doing tonight and use that in that context. So that was kind of always on the table, what you've asked for the next meeting, as part of the visioning, so that we can really look at some number of differences, right? And see that percentage change.
Who does this thing? Does this, is the residents come in here with their Sharpies and?
Well, the question is, how would you all like to see it? Because we're going to prepare materials, and Melissa can talk a little bit more about it, but there will be some kind of collaboration between all of us on that.
They want to look at
So what days?
FAR though, right?
So what we're looking to do is, I think 2 weeks might be a little bit soon.
We need at least a
But
month's notice.
But we're going to do,
3 weeks.
we'd like to have an overview where we provide everybody with the basic information so that we answer all the questions and we clarify everything. And then we're going to get their input. We're going to get input on the concepts and that are further refined based on the discussion we had tonight. it might make sense to break into smaller groups so that we can have a more robust discussion and people have time to talk, because it seems like people like to talk in this community, which is a good thing. We can, I mean,
We can't have a community visioning session in 2 weeks without giving proper.
I understand, I got that.
Format is.
So is this a 4-hour event where we're gonna sit down with Sharpies and pieces of paper and we're gonna sketch out what we think, what these, or is this something that you're gonna present and then we're going to add our comments to in each one of these schemes? I'm not quite
You
sure.
want interaction?
Is it an hour and a half event or is it a 6-hour event?
I think-
We've been at like 3 hours just talking.
I think we need to talk about that because I think some new things kind of came out of this meeting. I think we need to revisit the 1.0 FAR. Really understand what that means, have the comparisons, share that information so people kind of understand what's today and what that increase would be. There's been some great comments about these scenarios. I don't want to call them concepts anymore because concepts insinuate that this is a reality, this is going to happen. These aren't going to happen. Again, I want to stress that this is a tool for us to flush out those things that we need to change in the current zoning text, right? So I think we look at providing other scenarios where we retain certain uses or even suggest a phasing or build out, or how could the community grow into a development like this? I think that would be informative. I think that would be helpful. So there's things that I think we, on this side of the table, need to come back through and say, all right, what did we hear today? How can we address those? And what materials do we need to present or share and have conversations with?
Is that meeting with us or with the public also?
That's with you and the public.
So the idea was that the meetings that we've had so far have been committee meetings and the public has been invited to participate and at the end, but as you can see, there's a lot more interaction, which has been good. The visioning session is going to be for the community. So it's not going to be run by the committee, it's going to be run by the consultants and the city.
So I think to clarify a lot of things, maybe there should be meeting between us first before we go back to public.
We've had 4 meetings, this is our 4th meeting.
Because the issue of,
Yeah.
1.7, that shows up again and again. And overall concept is not clear yet.
Yeah, we spent, in all honesty, we went through a lot of this dialogue and understanding prior to the point we got here. And so that, that's just where we are now. And now we want to get clear with you all about the concept of the visioning session and the participation that's required from you all as we go out into the public together. So we need your feedback because that's the next step. We can't have another committee meeting with you, actually.
What would you
We
like
have
to
do that.
focus on at the visioning session? What would you like to focus on? Heights, landscaping, and things that Mr. Mitsui was talking about?
I have a couple of questions and a couple of comments. And one of them is directed to you. But I agree that we looked at that one number and we know what the present FAR is. And I suspect that the theory of going to 1.5 to see what those incentives are, we should know what that is, all right? I do think that you still need to give us the comparative analysis. I think that you have to do that because, a 40% increase in parking would be a problem, as opposed to reducing the number of parking spaces, as you showed in that Georgia example, right? So I think that there's still some formative information that we need to get clear. I think we've settled the outrage of the enormous skyscrapers that we're going to look out over the US 1, right? We've gotten past that, so we put that one away. We kind of sense there's a scale relationship there that's going to work. I tend to agree with the commentary about the what you're capable of doing with the federal highway and planting, and we have to start asking for that now. And if we're going to get artwork as part of an incentive and things of that nature, we need to start talking about that with our partners, because that could be a real nice way to work into this very dead corridor that links 100, the city, right? So I agree with you. I think that the trend and the improvements in cities throughout South Florida all move in the direction of mixed use, and it's been studied enough by universities and colleges that that modern concept that you have to separate occupancies doesn't work. So I think that what did not exist 20 or 30 years ago, 40 years ago, it changed in a major way with Miami 21, the vision plan that they had of creating mixed use. So I'm convinced, as a resident and as an architect, I have seen the transformations of cities that were dead at night and are alive during the daytime, and they're alive not till 1 o'clock, 2, 3, 4, where people want bars open till 5 and 6 o'clock. The cities are alive, all right, through mixed use. So, I believe that that's the way of the future, and I think that your effort, that you heard us, I think, to have green urban space. Generally I saw that you really, well, that's probably what you do. You're a landscape guy. So
Selfishly, yes.
Selfishly, Victoria loves it. Then we got a bunch of landscape people here. So I can see that the motivation. Everybody wants landscape. You got two of the board being landscape. You're a landscaper. So I can see that in all of your sketches and your drawings, and I agree with them. I agree with it. I also agree with the wedding cake concept of the back end to scale back to US 1. I don't know, and this is an open question, of the gallery of colonnades that can exist on the front of US 1. So if in fact, and someone asked a question, and I'm not proposing it, I just don't know, okay? But the idea of creating a kind of colonnade effect that the street is so far back with a setback that there should be, colonnades in the front and stepping back, if that is an incentive, which is some of the first slides you showed towards the courtyards. I think someone said the front of our city is US 1, and we have to make accommodations for that, right? So how do you break down that front that you are representing those great streets where they're scaled in a way that you can see the intersections and so forth. So I'm not sure when someone that front street along US 1, all right, where you have the green strip.
You're referring to this.
Right there, yes.
Yeah.
Whatever you do here and at the other intersection, we have to hold it true throughout.
You're right.
So is it truly not more of a kind of a more building facing that closer to the street, hugging the street? And it's a question. I don't know how I feel about it yet. I think that you have to look at that. So those are my comments about it. I do agree that August 30th is August 30th.
Would that work? August 30th?
For your
Tuesday?
envisioning?
Would that work? August 30th? You have that 2 weeks?
We need to coordinate with Parks and Recreation to find a venue. We need to understand what the agenda is going to be, how long it's going to take. Do you want to have it on a weekday? August 30th is 22 days from, or 20 days from today.
So the next, the
I don't think so.
following
I think maybe maybe the next week in September, I
So-
don't know. But week we've got a schedule, we've also got.
So Steve, is it possible that we have one more meeting, Steve, is it possible that we have one more meeting bringing some of these things to closure? And then set this other meeting, which probably would work on a Saturday or something, so we could get more public in?
Can I also,
And on that day, maybe it's a day that we can test what the parameters are in more of a charrette type of format.
So what days, you mentioned August 30th?
No, yeah, I can. I won't be available September 9. I'm going away for 2 weeks. So, but if I'm not here, you all are here, so no problem.
I wanted to add one more thing that you were talking about.
August 30th is in 2 weeks. I mean,
Yeah, August
what we
30th
wanna
is
do-
fine, or.
My only concern is that we need to give the public an opportunity to,
So what I'm saying from the fact-finding part,
we have to provide them.
maybe we could have one more meeting. We'll make it a short meeting.
Well, so,
Okay, go ahead.
yeah, so we have to also be cognizant of like what our contract is
Oh, okay.
and our scope of
That's
services,
about
and what we're
right.
getting, what we're getting paid, right, 'cause we're all, that's part of why we do it. So,
It's important.
right, we have to make a living, so we have six
We have
meetings.
volunteer, we forget it.
Okay.
You understand, you've heard of that, so I think it's if we wanna do that, that's great, but we would have to talk to Steve.
Well, one thing I want to add, I totally agree with John, our chair, what he talked the last 3 minutes. But I would also like to add that I didn't see any proposal with the connection to the US one. So in other words, how the US one is going to picture it. That's the main thing. I mean, we had so many problems just to get out of the US one to the west side of the highway. So I think somehow we should deal with that in the scheme of things. So there will be a new
You can solve those problems.
I don't know.
There's been a lot of focus on the FAR tonight, and that's only one small component of the overall plan, and we got into that discussion
Yes.
because of the county's RTC ordinance. There's so much more to focus on.
I know.
So what date do you propose?
Well, I mean, Steve, you're saying that it needs to be a month. I think we.
No, all I'm saying is we need to provide notice to the community. We need to advertise it through Michelle, and give people notice so that they can prepare. We can't just say there's going to be a visioning session tomorrow, by the way. I mean, that's not going to, we need to give adequate notice, is all I'm saying. And I would say a minimum of 3 weeks' notice is probably sufficient.
September 6th.
So the September, I mean, that would be August 31st would be 3 weeks.
Steve, the 25th meeting is something different, right?
No, that's not going to occur.
Oh, it's not? Oh, thank you.
Yes, that's a good date.
I mean, so, okay, August 31st is something that we could do, and if we wanted to, we could start the meeting. We could design it in a way that we could start it early, and we could do it in, I have some ideas how we could do it, so that people could come kind of like on a rotating basis. They could come at 4, they could come at 5, they
An open
could
house.
come at 6.
That's a good idea.
So that way, people aren't constrained by the time, and then it gives.
And you can put
Okay.
it
Can everybody be here that day? August 31st,
You know, I mean, what's interesting with that is it ends in a park. The city owns something in a park, and they own Wayside Park. So maybe in these parks, we could introduce pedestrian corridors through the park.
Yeah.
Or even if you take one side of the park and make that
August 31st
from
is a
like
Saturday.
Yeah.
Sunny Lane.
Definitely.
So that would be something you could show. You're working on sharing. I'm hesitant with this
I
one.
can say it nicely, like, what you like. All right, so.
Tuesdays the third, can I just say
31st?
Wednesdays aren't good days necessarily? I'm concerned about the availability of rooms.
Staging is probably the cool.
Well,
I'm concerned about the availability of rooms, and Rob Mattis, the Parks and Recreation Director, told me that Mondays and Tuesdays are good. Wednesdays and Thursdays, second and fourth Wednesdays and Thursdays, they have a camera club at Evelyn Greer Park, it's not good. But the
Maybe they can photograph, maybe they can photograph.
How about
us.
Saturday?
Mondays and Tuesdays are good.
No Saturday. All right, so Tuesday, how about the Tuesday, August 30th?
30th. Yes.
Which was your day?
Yeah.
Your day.
We're gonna make it, we're gonna work for
Tuesday,
it.
30th.
Tuesday, August 30th?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right.
A motion
I move.
And what time would that be?
Seconds?
Like
Motion
earlier?
to adjourn.
Second, okay, we're adjourned.
We'll have to work on that.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.